For 8 years, Ethan Brooks showed up to every family dinner, every birthday, every quiet Tuesday night when Olivia Carter needed someone. And nobody called it love. They called it friendship. They called it convenient. They called it safe. But safety is just another word for fear wearing a nicer coat. Tonight, in her mother's kitchen, with cake still on the counter and string lights blinking outside, a single sentence from the wrong person at the wrong moment is about to tear 8 years of careful silence wide open. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The anniversary party had been Diane Carter's idea naturally. Everything in the Carter family was Diane's idea. The color of the tablecloths, the playlist, the fact that they were having a party at all to celebrate 35 years of marriage to a man who would have been perfectly content with a quiet dinner and a bottle of decent wine. But Diane Carter did not do quiet. She did loud, warm, slightly chaotic, and deeply loving, which was why by 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, her house in Westfield, New Jersey was packed with 60-something guests, 2 borrowed folding tables, and enough food to survive a mild apocalypse. Ethan Brooks had been setting up since 4 in the afternoon. Nobody asked him to. That was the thing about Ethan and the Carter family. The asking had stopped years ago. He just showed up, the way he always did, his truck pulling into the driveway right as Diane was catastrophizing about whether she'd ordered enough pastry from the bakery on Elm Street. He'd taken one look at the trays lined up on the kitchen island and said, "You ordered enough for 100 people, Diane. We have 60 coming. We're going to be fine." She'd grabbed his face in both hands and kissed his cheek like he'd just told her she won the lottery. That was 8 years of Ethan Brooks in one gesture. He was 32 now, a single father, the kind of tired that doesn't fully go away even after a good night's sleep. His daughter, Maya, was 6, obsessed with dinosaurs and strawberry milk, and currently spending the weekend with her grandmother on her mother's side, a fact that should have given Ethan a break, but instead left him slightly unsure what to do with himself. So he'd come here, to this house, to this noise, to this family that wasn't his, technically, but felt more like home than most places he'd actually lived. The party moved the way good parties move, loud for a while, then quieter, then loud again, the older guests settling into corners with wine glasses, the younger ones gravitating toward the backyard where someone had strung up white lights between the fence posts and the old oak tree that Olivia's father, Robert, had planted the year the girls were born. Robert Carter was a tall, quiet man with a steady handshake and the kind of patience that comes from decades of living with a woman like Diane. He'd spent most of the night standing near the grill with a beer, looking genuinely happy in the understated way of men who don't need to perform happiness to feel it. Ethan liked Robert Carter, had since the beginning. "You've been refilling that chip bowl for 3 hours," Robert said at one point, appearing beside Ethan near the kitchen counter with the quiet ease of a man who'd perfected the art of moving through a crowded room without disturbing it. "The chips keep disappearing," Ethan said. "That's because people keep eating them. Then somebody has to refill the bowl." Robert looked at him for a second, something almost amused in his expression. "My wife has been trying to get you to slow down all night, you know. She thinks you're working too hard." "Your wife told me to check on the spinach dip 20 minutes ago." Robert sighed. She absolutely did. He clapped Ethan once on the shoulder, the way men do when they mean something they're not going to say out loud, and went back to his corner near the grill. Olivia had been running late. That was not unusual. Olivia Carter ran late to almost everything that wasn't work, because work was the one place she allowed herself to be ruthlessly punctual. In every other area of her life, time operated more like a suggestion. She was 30 years old, the CEO of a mid-sized tech consulting firm she'd built from something that started as a freelance project in her apartment, and she moved through her days at a pace that Ethan had privately compared to watching someone try to carry too many grocery bags in one trip. Technically possible, clearly working, but tense in a way that made you nervous just looking at it. She'd arrived at 7:45, still in the blazer she'd worn to a meeting that ran late, her dark hair pulled back in something that had started the day as a neat bun and was now more of an optimistic suggestion. She'd kissed her mother, hugged her father, waved at the assembled relatives, grabbed a glass of wine, and then found Ethan in the kitchen and immediately leaned against the counter beside him like she was a plant that had just been watered. "Long day?" he said, not looking up from the tray he was rearranging. "I had a call with a client in Singapore at 6 a.m., a board presentation at noon, and then my assistant quit via text message at 3:30. "The assistant you hired 6 months ago." "The very same. The one you said was actually working out this time?" I'd appreciate it if you didn't remember everything I've ever said to you. He looked up then, and she was already looking at him, and she was almost smiling, the kind of almost smile that was more honest than a full one, because it wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. The spinach dip is on the second shelf, he said. Your mom asked me to tell you it's the good kind, not the store brand. Olivia reached over and stole a piece of bruschetta from the tray he'd just arranged. You're impossible, he told her. I know, she said, and went to find the spinach dip. By 11, the party was winding down in the slow, comfortable way of evenings that nobody actually wants to end. The older relatives had said their goodbyes and filed out in ones and twos. Diane was on the back patio with her sister, laughing about something that had happened at a cousin's wedding 15 years ago. Robert had fallen asleep in his armchair in the den, which everyone pretended not to notice because it was his anniversary and he'd been on his feet since noon and he'd earned it. Olivia's younger sister, Sophie, was 26, a kindergarten teacher who lived 40 minutes away in Hoboken and came home for every holiday and most random weekends because she was the kind of person who genuinely loved her family and didn't feel the need to manufacture reasons to be around them. She was warm and funny, and occasionally too perceptive for comfort, which was a trait she'd had since she was small and which had not diminished with age. Sophie was also, by 11 p.m., 2.5 glasses of white wine in, which was not quite enough to make her reckless, but was enough to make her honest. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten piece of anniversary cake and her phone, scrolling through photos she'd taken during the evening, when she looked up and watched Ethan cross the kitchen to put another empty tray in the sink. He moved easily, unhurriedly, rinsing the tray and stacking it with the others without making any kind of production of it. Sophie watched him for a second. Then she looked down at her phone. Then she looked up again. You know what's weird, she said, to no one in particular. Ethan glanced at her. They were the only two in the kitchen. What's weird? Sophie tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was working something out. Olivia went on 3 dates last year. 3. She's been on more dates this year already, and not one of them has lasted past the second month. Okay, Ethan said carefully. And every single time, Sophie continued, in the musing, slightly meandering tone of someone following a thought wherever it leads, every single time Olivia talks about why it didn't work, why this one was too surface level, why that one was great on paper but she just couldn't feel it, she ends up describing things. She paused, took a small bite of cake. Like specific things, small things. The way he noticed when she was tired. Whether he knew how she took her coffee without being told, whether he made her feel like she didn't have to explain everything from scratch every single time. Ethan had stopped rinsing the tray. He wasn't sure when he'd stopped, but the water was off, and his hands were still on the edge of the sink, and he wasn't moving. Sophie, he said, I'm just saying. She wasn't looking at him now. She was still looking at her phone, scrolling through pictures, her voice light and conversational, like she was talking about the weather. Every time she describes what's missing, what she's looking for, it sounds exactly like you. The kitchen went quiet, not the ambient quiet of a room between conversations. The specific quiet that happens when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, that lands in the air between people and stays there, heavy and real, while everyone in the room processes the fact that a line has just been crossed and there is no stepping back over it. Sophie looked up. She looked at Ethan's face, and something in her own face shifted. The wine-loosened ease replaced by something more careful, more present. Oh, she said softly. You knew that. Ethan turned back to the sink, turned the water back on. Sophie, or you didn't know it, but you're not surprised. She set down her fork. Ethan, I'm not trying to start anything. I swear, She stopped, exhaled. I've been watching the two of you for years, and I thought you both knew. I thought it was just this mutual thing that you'd both agreed to leave alone for whatever reason, and I respected that. I did. But then Olivia called me last week after her date with that architect guy didn't work out, and she was talking about why, and she said he was perfectly nice, but being with him felt like translating. Like she always had to find the words for things that she shouldn't have to find words for. And I thought about who she never has to translate for. Sophie. His voice came out quieter than he intended, quieter and rougher. She stopped talking. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, in the yellow kitchen light with the sounds of the party fading outside and the water running uselessly into the sink, and Ethan reached over and turned the water off again. "Where is she?" he asked. "Living room, I think. Saying bye to Aunt Margot." He nodded once, didn't move. Sophie picked up her fork again, slowly, and looked back down at her cake. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you're her person. I think she knows it too, and it scares the hell out of her." Ethan braced both hands on the edge of the sink, stood there a moment, then he pushed off and walked out of the kitchen, and Sophie sat alone in the yellow light and ate her cake, and did not let herself think too hard about whether she'd just done something very right or very wrong. He found Olivia in the front hallway, hugging her Aunt Margot goodbye, laughing at something Margot had said about her husband's attempt at ballroom dancing at the reception earlier in the evening. Ethan waited in the doorway between the hallway and the living room, hands in his pockets, watching her laugh. The real version. The one that took over her whole face and made her close her eyes for a second, and felt something in his chest do the thing it had been doing for years that he'd been carefully, methodically ignoring. Margot left. Olivia turned and saw him. She read something in his face immediately. That had always been one of the unnerving things about Olivia Carter. She read people fast, and she read Ethan faster than anyone. 8 years of proximity had made them fluent in each other in ways that had nothing to do with words. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing happened." "Something happened. You have that face." "I don't have a face." "You absolutely have a face. You have several faces, and right now you're making the one that means something happened, and you're figuring out how to say it." She stepped closer. "Ethan, what is it?" He looked at her for a second, then Sophie said something. Olivia stilled. It was subtle, a barely perceptible pause in her breathing, a slight change in the quality of her attention. She'd always been good at staying still under pressure. It was a skill that served her well in board meetings, and not at all in moments like this one. "Sophie says a lot of things," Olivia said carefully. "Yeah." He held her gaze. "She said that every man you've dated, every time it doesn't work out, you end up describing what's missing, and what you're describing sounds like me." The hallway was quiet. The last guests were gone. Her mother's voice drifted in faintly from the backyard, still laughing with her sister. The string lights outside blinked once. "She shouldn't have said that," Olivia said, but she didn't deny it. That was the thing. She didn't deny it. "Liv." She shouldn't have. Her voice was steady, but she wasn't quite meeting his eyes. She was looking at a point just past his left shoulder, a tell he knew well. She did it when she was holding something in, pressing down on something she wasn't ready to let out. That wasn't her conversation to start. "Maybe not." He waited. "But is she wrong?" The question hung between them like a thing with weight. Olivia looked at him. Really looked at him, and he could see her working through it. The calculation, the risk assessment, the things she did when she was deciding how honest to be. He'd watched her do it 100 times in 8 years. In conversations with investors, with difficult clients, with her mother when her mother was pushing for something Olivia didn't want to give. He'd never seen her do it with him. That was what made his stomach tighten. The fact that she had to think about it. That she was measuring the risk of being honest with him the way she measured every other risk in her life. "I don't want to do this here," she said finally. "Okay." "Not in the hallway at my parents' house at 11 at night after a party." "Okay," he said again, and meant it. "Where then?" She looked at him for another long moment. Then she tilted her head slightly toward the back of the house, toward the back door in the backyard, and the string lights, and the old oak tree. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. "I need to help my mom with the last of the dishes." He nodded. She walked past him toward the kitchen. He stood in the hallway alone for a moment, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat doing something it had no business doing at a 35th wedding anniversary party on a Saturday night in Westfield, New Jersey. He went back to the kitchen while he waited because he couldn't stand still, and he needed something to do with his hands. Sophie was gone, had probably retreated upstairs with the acute social awareness of someone who knew when they'd said enough. Diane was at the back door, saying a final goodbye to her sister. Ethan moved to the sink and started on the remaining trays. The real cleanup now. The post-party logistics of stacking dishes and consolidating leftover food and covering things with plastic wrap. It was the kind of work he did automatically. His hands knew what to do and his brain was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about the first time he'd met Olivia Carter. 8 years ago, at a mutual friend's birthday barbecue in Brooklyn. He'd been 24, newly single after a 2-year relationship that had ended with the quiet certainty of two people who liked each other but didn't actually fit. And she'd been 22, just starting the job that would eventually become the foundation of her company, carrying herself with the kind of intensity that either intimidates people or draws them in completely. He'd been on the drawn-in side of that equation from approximately the first conversation. They'd talked for 3 hours at that barbecue, about work, about cities they wanted to live in someday, about the book she was reading that he'd also read, about a terrible movie they'd both seen and disagreed about sharply enough that the argument had been genuinely fun. He'd made her laugh twice, and she'd made him feel, both times, like he'd won something. He'd asked for her number before he left, and she'd given it to him with the directness she gave everything. No games, no "we'll see," just her number and a look that said she meant it. He'd meant to ask her out. He'd genuinely, fully, sincerely meant to. And then life had intervened in the way it does when you're 24 and underprepared for it. A family situation that took up 2 months of his attention and energy, and then a work opportunity that pulled him sideways for 3 more months. And by the time he'd surfaced and looked around, something had shifted. They'd been texting the whole time, talking on the phone, falling into the easy rhythm of people who just naturally communicate well. And somehow in the process of almost asking her out, he'd become her friend instead. He told himself it was fine. He told himself it was fine for 8 years. The thing about a good friendship, a real one, the kind that runs deep and sustains you and becomes load-bearing in your life, is that it becomes its own argument against change. You start to think, why risk this? Why introduce something that could break it? The friendship becomes both the thing you want to protect and the cage you build around yourself trying to protect it. He was standing at the sink thinking about all of this when Olivia came into the kitchen. She'd taken off the blazer. She was in just a white button-down now, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and she looked more like herself than she had all night. Less CEO, more Olivia. She looked tired in the way she always looked tired at the end of a long day. A particular heaviness around her eyes that she never tried to hide around him because she knew he'd already seen it 1,000 times. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Mom's settled," she said. "Dad's still asleep in the chair. Sophie's upstairs. So it's just us." "Yeah." She paused. "You ready?" "No," he said honestly. "But let's go anyway." "What?" The backyard was empty and cool, the night air carrying that particular early October quality. Not cold enough to need a jacket, but cool enough to feel it on your arms, crisp and clear. The string lights were still on, strung between the fence and the oak tree in neat rows, white and soft, casting the backyard in a light that made everything look slightly more like a memory than a present moment. They sat on the back steps side by side with a few inches of space between them that felt like considerably more. Olivia had her wine glass from earlier, mostly empty. Ethan had a glass of water he'd grabbed from the kitchen out of the need for something to hold. For a little while, neither of them said anything. This was another thing about the two of them. They were comfortable with silence in a way that took most people years to achieve with anyone. They didn't need to fill the quiet to validate each other's presence. They could just be in the same space without it becoming awkward. But this silence had a different texture to it. It wasn't comfortable. It was charged. It had something in it that both of them knew was going to have to come out eventually. Olivia spoke first. "When David and I stopped seeing each other," she said. David was the architect, the most recent one, the one Sophie had apparently referenced on the phone call with Olivia last week. "I kept trying to figure out what was missing, because on paper it made sense. He was smart, he was kind, he was interesting to talk to. He remembered things I told him. He was trying, genuinely, but I kept feeling like..." She stopped, turned the wine glass slowly in her hands. "Like I was in a conversation where I had to keep providing context. Not in a bad way. Not because he wasn't paying attention. Just because he didn't already have the context. He didn't know me." Ethan was quiet, and I kept thinking, this is normal. This is how it works with someone new. You build context over time. You fill each other in. That's the whole process. She paused. "But then I'd think about the way it feels to talk to you, and..." She stopped again. "And?" he said softly. "And I'd realize that I didn't know what it was like to have someone not already know me. Not with you. You just..." She made a small, helpless gesture with one hand. "You just know. You knew I wasn't okay 3 weeks ago before I'd said a single word about it. You noticed I hadn't eaten before I'd noticed myself. You... She stopped, exhaled. You read me in real time, Ethan. You always have, and I don't know when that became the standard I was measuring everyone else against, but it did. He sat with that for a moment. Why didn't you tell me, he asked, any of this? Olivia laughed, short and not entirely without bitterness. Because you're my best friend. Because I have been terrified, genuinely, actively terrified, of doing something that would mess that up. She finally looked at him directly. Do you know what it would do to me to lose you? Not just romantically, not just whatever this is, but to lose you, the person, the friendship, the 8 years of... She shook her head. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't. So you just kept it inside. What were my options, Ethan? Honestly, he turned to face her. The same ones I've been not taking for the better part of a decade. Olivia looked at him. You're not the only one who's been sitting on something, he said. I want to be clear about that. The string lights hummed softly. Somewhere down the street, a car passed. You've been... She started and stopped. Yeah. For how long? He thought about the birthday barbecue in Brooklyn, about 3 hours of the best conversation he'd had with anyone in months, and the number he'd gotten, and the question he'd never quite asked. He thought about 8 years of family dinners and late-night phone calls, and 1,000 ordinary moments that had lodged themselves in him like things he'd never be able to fully remove. Honestly, he said, I'm not sure there was a beginning. I think it was always something, and I just kept deciding not to look at it directly. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. And then Maya came along, and I was barely keeping my head above water, and I kept thinking, this isn't the time. You don't introduce complication into the one relationship in your life that's actually stable. You don't risk the one person who... He stopped. You don't risk you. Olivia's voice came out smaller than usual. You were protecting me. I was protecting both of us, or I told myself that. He shook his head. Honestly, I think I was scared. Simpler than that. I was just scared. Me too, she said, quietly. Me too. They sat there for a moment, with all of it between them. 8 years of almost things, of carefully managed distance, of feelings they'd both dressed up as friendship and carried around like they weighed nothing. They weighed something, they had always weighed something. Sophie wasn't wrong, Olivia said finally. No. I've been comparing everyone to you. Not consciously, not like a checklist, but somewhere underneath everything. Yes, the way you notice things, the way you don't need me to explain myself from the ground up every single time, the way you show up and just... She stopped. Yeah, she wasn't wrong. Liv. I know. I don't want to be the man everyone gets compared to, he said. His voice was steady, quieter than he expected, more certain. I want to be the one. Olivia looked at him for a long time. The string lights made her eyes bright. She looked tired and honest and less protected than he'd seen her in years. And something about that, the unguarded quality of it, the fact that she'd stopped performing okay, made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. That's terrifying, she said. I know. We could mess everything up. We could? If this goes wrong, Sultsi, then it goes wrong, he said. But Liv, we've been so careful. We've been so careful for so long, and I'm sitting here thinking, what did careful get us? We're still here. We still ended up at this conversation on these steps at midnight. She looked down at the wine glass in her hands, turned it once. You're right, she said, in the tone of someone who hates admitting that and admits it anyway. You're completely right, and I hate it. You hate it when I'm right. It's one of my favorite things about you. She looked up at him, and the thing that crossed her face was something complicated. Part laugh, part something more raw than that, part the particular expression she only had when she was feeling something she hadn't given herself permission to feel yet. I'm not ready to lose you, she said. Whatever happens. I need you to know that's real. I know, he said, me too. So we're careful, we go slow, we figure it out as we go, he said, like we figure out everything else. She was quiet for another moment. Then she uncurled slightly, a loosening in her shoulders, a releasing of something she'd been holding tight. Okay, she said. Okay? Yeah. She looked at him, and she was almost smiling again, the real kind. Okay. He was going to say something. He had something half-formed on the edge of his mind. But she leaned forward instead, closing the remaining inches between them on the back step, and kissed him. It was soft, brief, the gentlest possible punctuation on the end of a very long sentence. When she pulled back, she looked at him with something in her expression that he recognized because he'd been feeling it himself. The strange, disorienting sensation of something clicking into place after years of being slightly off-center. Not surprise, exactly. More like, oh, there it is. There we are. That's been a long time coming, she said very quietly. Yeah, he agreed. It really has. They sat on the back steps under the string lights for a long time after that, not talking about much, shoulders touching, the night cool around them, and the backyard quiet, and the house behind them full of the sleeping weight of a family that had always, in some quiet way, seen this coming before either of them had. Sophie, upstairs in her old bedroom, heard absolutely nothing. She smiled at the ceiling anyway. The drive home from Westfield took 40 minutes on a good night. That Saturday, it took Ethan closer to an hour, not because of traffic, the roads were nearly empty past midnight, but because he missed his exit on the Garden State Parkway and didn't notice until he was 2 miles past it. He wasn't entirely present for the drive. That was the honest answer. He was operating on autopilot, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but the part of his brain that was usually running the logistics of his life. Maya's school pickup schedule, the Henderson project due Thursday, whether he'd remembered to pay the electric bill, had gone unusually quiet. In its place was something he didn't have a clean word for. Not quite happiness. Not quite fear. Something that lived in the territory between those two things, where the ground was unfamiliar and your footing wasn't entirely sure. He'd kissed Olivia Carter on her parents' back steps at midnight, or she'd kissed him. The sequencing felt less important than the fact. By the time he pulled into the parking garage of his apartment building in Hoboken, it was past 1 in the morning. He sat in the car for a few minutes after he cut the engine, just sat there in the concrete quiet with the faint smell of exhaust and the sound of a distant elevator, and tried to take a personal inventory of how he actually felt about what had happened. The inventory came back complicated. There was something that felt like relief, which surprised him. Like a pressure he'd been carrying so long, he'd stopped registering it as pressure had finally, partially, released. And underneath the relief there was something warmer. The specific warmth of a thing finally named, finally acknowledged, finally allowed to exist in the open air instead of the closed-off room he'd been keeping it in for the better part of 8 years. But there was also the other thing, the thing that lived under the warmth, patient and persistent. The knowledge that they'd said a few true things on a set of back steps in the dark, and that the morning was coming regardless, and with it, the ordinary complication of two people who were already deeply embedded in each other's lives trying to become something more without breaking what they already had. He was aware that was not a small thing to navigate. He went upstairs. He didn't sleep particularly well. Olivia called at 9:15 the next morning. He was on his second cup of coffee and his first real coherent thought of the day when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter and her name appeared on the screen. He looked at it for exactly 2 rings before he picked up. "Hey," he said. "Hey." A pause. Brief, but present. "How'd you sleep?" "Poorly. You?" "I stared at the ceiling until about 3 a.m. and then slept through my first alarm." So the usual after a family event. Sure, let's call it that. Another pause, and he could hear in it the things she was circling around, the things she'd called to address but was taking a moment to approach. He waited. "I've been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out how to start this conversation," she said finally. "How's that going?" "Not great. I've drafted it like 4 times in my head and every version sounds either too casual or too much like a business meeting. I'd say go with the business meeting version. You're better in meetings?" She laughed, short and genuine, and some of the tension in the connection eased slightly. "Ethan." "Yeah. Last night was... I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not built that way, and I don't want to be." "Good. I'm not either. But I also don't..." She stopped. He could hear her moving around, the sound of footsteps on hardwood, the faint clink of what was probably her coffee mug. "I don't want to rush into something and handle it badly because we were careless at the beginning. That's how things get broken." He considered that. It was characteristically both very Olivia and very correct. She had a tendency to think 3 moves ahead, Sometimes to her detriment because life didn't always operate on the same schedule as her projections. But in this case, the instinct wasn't wrong. "Okay," he said, "so what does careful look like to you?" "It looks like not pretending last night was nothing, but also not showing up Monday acting like we figured everything out because we haven't. We've just—" She paused, searching for the word. "We've just stopped lying to each other about a thing. That's the beginning of something, not the whole thing." Agreed. And it means we talk. Properly. Not just check-in texts. Actually talk. She hesitated. "And maybe dinner, not like a thing, just you and me and a table and an actual conversation in a context where my mother is not in the next room and Sophie is not taking notes." Ethan almost smiled. Sophie wasn't taking notes. Sophie absolutely had opinions she was organizing internally, and that's basically the same thing. A beat. "So, dinner." "Yeah," he said. "Dinner." "This week? Maya's back Tuesday. I can do Wednesday." "Wednesday works." She said it in a tone that was trying to be normal and mostly landing. The particular quality of someone being very deliberate about not making a thing into more of a thing than it needed to be, and not quite succeeding at hiding that effort. He found it oddly endearing. Olivia Carter, who negotiated contracts worth 7 figures without visible stress, who had sat across from difficult investors and not blinked. She was being careful with him. Genuinely, visibly careful. In the specific way of someone who doesn't want to get it wrong. It meant more than she probably knew. "Wednesday," he confirmed. "Okay?" A short breath. "Okay. Good." Then quieter. "I'm really not sorry it happened. I want you to know that." "Me neither," he said. "Not even a little." He heard something in the silence that followed that he didn't try to name. It was enough. Wednesday came with the specific low-grade anxiety of something that matters. Ethan had known Olivia for 8 years and had somehow never experienced the particular flavor of nervousness that comes with picking a restaurant for a date with a person you already know better than almost anyone. It felt absurd. He knew her coffee order, her irrational hatred of cilantro, the fact that she always regretted ordering the salmon but occasionally ordered it anyway because she kept hoping it would be different. He'd sat across from her at a table more times than he could count. But those times had been something else, technically, even if they'd never felt like it. He picked a place in Jersey City, small, Italian, not too loud, with good wine and tables that weren't crammed together so close you were essentially eating with strangers. He'd been there once before with a college friend and remembered it as the kind of place that took food seriously without making a performance of it, the kind of place where a conversation could breathe. She was there when he arrived. 3 minutes early, which was unprecedented. She was sitting at the table with a glass of water and her phone face down in front of her, and she was wearing something he hadn't seen before, a dark green dress, simple, nothing elaborate, and she looked nervous in a way she would have denied if he'd pointed it out. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You're early," he said. "I'm never early." "I know, that's why I mentioned it." She picked up her water glass and took a sip, using the gesture to cover whatever was on her face for a second. "I've been sitting here talking myself out of overanalyzing this for 8 minutes. And? It's been a mixed success." She set the glass down, looked at him directly, the way she did when she'd decided to stop managing herself. "You look nice." "You look nervous?" "I look nice and I'm nervous, both things." The waiter came by to hand them menus and they ordered wine. She went with a Barbera, he went with whatever she was having because she knew wine better than he did, and there was no point pretending otherwise. And then settled into the kind of initial silence that happens between two people who are adjusting to the fact that a familiar setting has a new set of stakes. "This is weird," Olivia said finally, turning her menu over without looking at it. "A little." "Not bad weird." "No," he agreed. "Not bad weird." She finally opened the menu, glanced at it briefly, and set it down again. "Okay, I need to say something and I don't want it to derail the whole dinner, but I'll be distracted until I do." "Say it." "I've been thinking about what you said Saturday, about being careful for so long and what did careful get us." She folded her hands on the table. "And I've been thinking about the fact that I've been holding this, whatever this is, at arm's length for years because I was afraid of what would happen if it went wrong. And I think that's—" She paused. "I think that was cowardice dressed up as pragmatism, and I'm good at that." dressing things up so they look like strategy when they're actually just fear. He looked at her. Okay. I'm not telling you I fixed that. I'm just telling you I see it. She met his eyes. I think you deserve to know what you're getting into. Olivia, he said, in the tone he used when she was being too hard on herself. She recognized it. Her shoulders came down slightly. I know. You're also the person who built something real from nothing, who calls her mother back every time even when she's exhausted, who showed up for me when Maya was sick last spring and sat in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours and never made me feel like it was an inconvenience. He paused. You've got cowardice in you. So do I. So does everyone. That's not the whole picture. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her menu. The salmon sounds good. You always regret the salmon. Maybe this time will be different. It won't. You don't know that. Olivia, it's never different. She almost smiled. Fine, I'll get the pasta. He got the pasta too. They split an order of bread that neither of them needed and ate it anyway, and the nervousness settled into something lower, something more like the ordinary texture of an evening with Olivia that happened to also be something else. The conversation moved the way their conversations always moved, not in a straight line but in loops, circling back, touching different subjects with the ease of people who'd had enough exchanges to develop real shorthand. She told him about the situation at work with the assistant who'd quit, which turned out to be more complicated than a text message departure. There was a whole underlying story involving a team conflict she'd missed signs of, and she was frustrated with herself for not catching it sooner. He listened without trying to fix it, which was what she needed. He'd learned that a long time ago. She was a CEO. She didn't need someone to solve the problem. She needed someone to sit with her while she solved it herself. He told her about Maya's latest school project, a model of the solar system constructed out of styrofoam balls, and his general inability to find the right-sized styrofoam ball for Neptune, which had led to a 40-minute hardware store odyssey, and a Neptune that was technically too large relative to Saturn, but which Maya had declared accurate enough, with the confidence of a 6-year-old who doesn't sweat the small stuff. Olivia laughed at that. The real laugh, full face, the one he'd been cataloging for 8 years. She said, accurate enough? Dead serious. Looked me right in the eye and said, Neptune is big, Daddy, it's fine. She's going to run something someday. She already runs our apartment. I'm just the one who pays the rent. The wine was good. The pasta was better. By the end of the main course, the restaurant had filled up around them, and the ambient noise had risen to that particular warm pitch of a busy dinner service. Not loud enough to require raised voices, just present enough to give the table its own private pocket of sound. Can I ask you something? Olivia said over the remains of her pasta. And I want you to answer honestly, not the way you answer when you're trying to protect my feelings. I always answer you honestly. You soft pedal sometimes. When you think I'm already stressed. He conceded that with a small tilt of his head. Ask. Are you scared? She held his gaze. Of this? Of us? The actual prospect of trying this. He thought about it. Not the reflexive, reassuring answer, but the actual honest one. Yeah, he said. I'm scared of getting it wrong. Scared of... He paused. I've got Maya. And you're not separate from my life. You're in it. If this doesn't work, it's not like ending something contained. It touches everything. She nodded. Quiet. But I'm more scared of the alternative, he said. I'm more scared of another 8 years of almost. He met her eyes. That's the thing that started feeling impossible. Not the risk of trying, the certainty of not. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not dramatic, not a gesture, just her hand, warm and present, on top of his. Me too. All of that. Me too. They stayed through the last of the wine. They argued briefly and without resolution about whether the tiramisu was worth it. It was not, in his opinion, and it was, in hers. And she ordered it anyway, and he ate half of it, which she found smug-making enough to bring up twice. They split the bill without discussion, the way they always had. Two people who'd long since stopped keeping score, walking out in the cool October night with the streets still busy and the restaurants on both sides lit up and warm. She put her arm through his, and they walked to where her car was parked 2 blocks down. They'd come separately, her choice, deliberate, the same careful instinct from the phone call on Sunday. and they stood at her car for a moment in the way of people with something left unsaid. "Wednesday was good," she said. "Wednesday was good," he agreed. "So maybe Friday. Friday works." She looked up at him. Her expression had that quality again, the unguarded one. Less CEO, more just Olivia, the version that existed under all the competence and the drive and the careful management of herself. He'd always been one of the only people she let see that version. He understood now, more than he had before, what it had meant that she'd trusted him with it. "This is still terrifying," she said. "Yeah, but I'm glad we're doing it." "Me too," he said. "More than I can tell you right now." She squeezed his arm once, then let go, and unlocked her car. He waited until she pulled out, and she waved once through the window, and then she was gone, and he was standing on a Jersey City sidewalk at 9:45 on a Wednesday night, with his hands in his pockets and something light moving through his chest that he let himself feel without immediately trying to name it. The weeks that followed were not a montage. That was the thing nobody tells you. That the beginning of something real is not the clean, elevated, soundtrack-scored sequence it is in movies. It was Wednesday dinners and Friday lunches and 3-hour phone calls that started as logistical check-ins and turned into something else. And it was also the ordinary friction of two busy people with complicated lives trying to carve out space for something new. Olivia's work hit a difficult stretch in late October. The company was in the middle of a significant contract renewal with one of its largest clients, a healthcare logistics firm that had been with her since the early days. And the negotiations were grinding in a way that was keeping her in the office until 8 or 9 most nights, and bringing her home to an apartment full of unopened mail and the particular hollow feeling of having given everything at work and having nothing left for the rest of her life. She texted Ethan about it on a Tuesday night, the message coming in at 9:47 p.m. "I'm still at the office. The Mercer contract is going to kill me." He texted back, "Go home. Eat something real. You can't negotiate well when you're running on nothing. I had a protein bar at 3. That's not food, Olivia. It has 17 grams of protein. That's not the point, and you know it." A pause. Then, "I know." Then, "I'm leaving in 20 minutes. Good. Don't be smug. I'm not smug. I'm right. There's a difference." 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then, "insufferable." Then, a few seconds later, "Thank you." He smiled at his phone in the dark of his apartment. Maya already asleep, the apartment quiet, and felt something settle warmly in his chest that he'd stopped trying to argue himself out of. But it wasn't all easy. The ease of their friendship didn't automatically translate into the ease of something more. And there were moments that required actual navigation. There was a Saturday in early November when he'd had a rough day. Maya had been sick with a bad cold, and he'd spent 2 days in the tight, exhausted loop of single parenting a sick child, juggling a work deadline, running on bad sleep. And when Olivia called that evening, he'd been shorter with her than he meant to be. Not rude, just flat. Depleted in a way that came out as distance. She noticed immediately. "You okay?" "Yeah, tired." "You sound more than tired." "Olivia, I'm fine." A beat. "Okay." Her voice was careful. "I can let you go." "I don't need you to let me go, I just—" He stopped, rubbed his face. "Sorry. I'm sorry. It's been a rough couple of days and I'm taking it out on the nearest person." "You're not taking it out on me. I'm being short with you. You're being human with me," she said. "There's a difference." A pause. "Do you want me to come over? I can bring food. I can also just exist in your general vicinity without talking, which I know you value." He laughed despite himself. "I do value that. I have a gift for companionable silence. You have a gift for a lot of things, including knowing when to push and when to just show up." She said it without weight, just a fact. "So, yes or no?" He thought about Maya asleep down the hall, and the apartment that smelled like chicken soup and children's cold medicine, and his own bone-deep tiredness, and Olivia's voice on the phone asking if she could just come and be there. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay. Come over." She brought Thai food and a terrible action movie she'd been holding in reserve for exactly this kind of evening, the kind with enough explosions to require zero emotional investment. And they ate on the couch with the sound low and Maya asleep 12 feet away, and Ethan gradually, by degrees, becoming less flat and less closed off, and more like himself. She didn't push him to talk about what had been hard about the week. She just sat next to him and was there, the way he'd been there for her 100 times. The specific gift of a person who understands that presence is sometimes enough. At some point, his head ended up on the back of the couch, and her head ended up on his shoulder, and neither of them commented on it. When she left at 11:30, she squeezed his hand at the door, and he squeezed back, and she went home. He stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed, feeling considerably less empty than he had 3 hours earlier, and went to check on Maya, who was sleeping deeply and breathing through her mouth in the unglamorous way of small children with stuffed-up noses. He stood in the doorway of her room for a minute. Maya, with her father's stubborn jaw and her own mother's dark curls, sprawled sideways across the bed with her stuffed triceratops tucked under one arm. 6 years old and already the most real thing in his life, the anchor point around which everything else organized itself. He thought about what it meant. Olivia becoming more present in this space. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that required decisions to be made yet, just in the ordinary, gradual way of someone being woven into the fabric of a life that already existed. He wasn't afraid of it, exactly, but he was aware of it. He went to bed aware of it. Quote. The Mercer contract closed in mid-November, and Olivia came out the other side of it with the stunned, quiet relief of someone who'd been holding their breath for 6 weeks and finally got to exhale. She texted Ethan the moment the final signature came through, a message that said simply, "We got it," in capital letters followed by approximately 7 characters that were not quite coherent, which he interpreted correctly as extreme relief, and then called him 20 minutes later from the parking garage of her office building because she needed to tell someone who would actually understand what it meant. He was in the middle of bedtime with Maya, which she knew, but he answered anyway. "We got it," she said. "I read the text. 63 days? I have been working on this for 63 days, and it is done." "You did it. I almost didn't. 3 weeks ago, I genuinely thought it was going to fall apart, and I was going to have to... It doesn't matter. We got it." "You got it," he corrected, in the particular tone he used when he wanted her to actually hear what he was saying. "Not we. You." A pause, quieter. "My team was great. Your team was great because you built them and because you didn't fall apart when the timeline slipped. That's yours, Olivia." She was quiet for a second. He could hear her breathing, the ambient sound of the parking garage. "Can I see you tomorrow?" she asked. "I know it's a weeknight, and Maya..." "Come for dinner," he said. "I'll cook. We'll celebrate properly." "You don't have to cook." "I want to cook. Come at 7. She came at 7. He'd made her favorite. A roasted chicken with roasted vegetables, simple and warm, the kind of food that felt like the opposite of the protein bars and conference room lunches she'd been surviving on. Maya, who had met Olivia many times before and had an opinion about most things, informed Olivia over dinner that chickens were not dinosaurs, even though they were technically related, a fact she'd apparently discussed at length with her class that week. Olivia accepted this information with full seriousness. "So they're like very distant cousins?" "Very, very distant," Maya confirmed. "Like the kind you don't really know." "My family has those." "Do they look like chickens?" "Not most of them." Maya considered this. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied, and went back to her dinner. Ethan caught Olivia's eye across the table, and she was trying not to laugh, and he was too, and there was something in that shared moment, the mundane, specific pleasure of being in on the same joke with someone, in the middle of an ordinary dinner, that felt like exactly the thing he'd been trying to protect for 8 years, and also exactly what he'd been afraid of losing by trying for more. He was beginning to understand that those two fears didn't have to be in opposition. After Maya went to bed, they sat in the kitchen with the remains of dinner cleared away, and a bottle of wine he'd been saving for something worth saving it for, and Olivia said, "She's wonderful, you know, Maya." "She's exhausting," he said, "and wonderful. Both things. You're good with her. You're really good." She said it quietly, looking at her glass, and there was something in her voice he hadn't heard before, something careful, something measured, like she was looking at a part of the picture she hadn't let herself look at too directly until now. "I'm just her dad," he said. "I'm figuring it out as I go. I don't always know what I'm doing. Nobody does." She finally looked up. "But she's happy. You can see it. She's secure and happy, and she knows she's loved, and that's not nothing. That's not a small thing at all." He looked at her for a moment. "You're thinking about something." She almost smiled. "I'm always thinking about something." "What is it?" She turned the wine glass slowly. I'm thinking that I've spent a lot of years being careful about my own life in a way that I've kept certain things out of it because I was afraid of what adding them would cost me. And I'm looking at yours and thinking, you added the hardest possible thing. You became a father, alone, and it didn't diminish your life. It just made it bigger. He was quiet. I think I've been small on purpose, she said. Smaller than I had to be, in certain ways. She looked up at him. I'm not saying I have any idea what I'm doing. I'm saying I want to stop being small on purpose. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise of anything specific. But it landed in him the way honest things do. Not with noise, but with weight. Okay, he said. Okay, she echoed. They sat in the kitchen for another hour, talking about nothing in particular, the way they'd always talked, but different now. Less carefully managed, less contained. More like two people who'd stopped pretending they didn't matter to each other and were still figuring out what to do with that fact. When she left that night, he kissed her at the door. Brief, warm, and she rested her hand flat against his chest for a second before she stepped back. Good dinner, she said. Good contract, he said. She was already smiling when she turned to go. He closed the door and stood in his front hallway in the quiet, with Maya asleep down the hall and the kitchen smelling like roasted chicken and the particular settling feeling of an evening well spent. And he allowed himself, carefully, to consider the possibility that this might actually work. Not perfectly, not without friction, not without the two of them occasionally being too much of themselves at each other in difficult moments. But really, actually, in the way of things that are built slowly and honestly by people who aren't pretending. He went to bed that night without staring at the ceiling. It was the first time in weeks he hadn't. The first real test came from a direction neither of them anticipated, which was probably how it always worked with the things that actually mattered. It was a Sunday in late November, 3 weeks after the Mercer contract closed, and Ethan was at his kitchen table with his laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside it when his phone rang with a number he didn't immediately recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. He had a report half finished, and Maya was at a birthday party until 3, and he had a narrow window of uninterrupted work time that he was protective of. But something made him pick up. Ethan Brooks? Yeah, this is Karen Holt. I'm calling from Garrison and Holt Associates. We're an architecture and design firm based in Chicago. A brief pause. We've been following your project management work through the infrastructure consulting space, and we have a senior director position opening up in the new year. Your name came up through 2 separate referrals, and I was hoping to have a preliminary conversation. He sat back in his chair. Okay, he said carefully, tell me more. She told him more. The position was substantial, a step up in scope and compensation that was significant enough to be genuinely compelling, heading a division that worked on large-scale public infrastructure projects. Exactly the kind of work that had drawn him into this field in the first place before the mid-sized consulting firm he currently worked for had gradually, by degrees, become more administrative than substantive. The role was creative, it had weight, and it was in Chicago. That was the part he kept returning to after he ended the call. Chicago was not New Jersey. He sat at his kitchen table for a while after that, coffee entirely cold now, laptop abandoned. He thought about the call with the careful attention he gave to things that had the potential to change the shape of his life. He thought about Maya's school, which she loved, and her grandmother who lived 20 minutes away and who had Maya every other weekend. He thought about his apartment, which was small and familiar. He thought about the Carter family and Sunday dinners in Westfield and 8 years of proximity to a set of people who had become something like his own. He thought about Olivia. They'd been, whatever they were, for 6 weeks, which was not very long by most measurements. Long enough to know that something real was forming, not long enough to know the shape of it yet. Long enough that the idea of a conversation about a job in Chicago felt like it had stakes he wasn't entirely sure how to calculate. He didn't call her that day. He needed to think first. And calling Olivia when he hadn't thought something through was an exercise in getting very precise feedback on his own half-formed reasoning, which was sometimes useful and sometimes just overwhelming. He thought about it for 2 days. On Tuesday evening, after Maya was asleep, he called. Hey, she said, you've had something on your mind since Sunday. How do you know that? You've texted me 3 times in 2 days, and each message has been noticeably shorter than your average. You go short when you're processing something. He stared at his ceiling. I got a job call on Sunday. A beat. Okay. Recruitment call. Senior director position at an architecture and design firm. He paused. In Chicago. The silence on her end had a specific quality. Not empty. The opposite of empty, actually. Full of the sound of her taking that in and deciding what to do with it. That's a significant call, she said finally. Yeah. Is it a good opportunity? On paper, it's a very good opportunity. The work is interesting. The compensation is a real step up. He paused. It's also Chicago. I know where Chicago is, Ethan. I know you do. I'm just... He stopped. Started again. I wanted to tell you before I thought too much about it. I didn't want to process it in a vacuum and then present you with a conclusion. Another silence, shorter this time. I appreciate that, she said. Her voice was measured. Not flat, but controlled in the way she got when she was managing herself carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I don't know yet. I haven't said anything to them beyond that I'd consider a formal conversation. I'm thinking about Maya, about the logistics of that, about whether this is the kind of opportunity that comes around twice. He hesitated. And I'm thinking about here, about what's here. Ethan, I'm not saying any of this to pressure you into anything. I'm saying it because it's true and because you're part of my life, and that's a fact regardless of what we are or aren't right now. She was quiet for a long moment. He could hear her breathing, the particular steadiness of it that meant she was keeping herself very even on purpose. I don't know what to tell you, she said, and I'm aware that's not helpful, but I'm trying not to say the wrong thing. A pause. I can tell you that I don't want you to factor me in as a constraint. If this is the right move for you and Maya, I don't want to be the reason you don't take it. You're not a constraint. I know. That's not what I meant, she exhaled. I meant, I don't want you to make a smaller choice because of something that's 6 weeks old and hasn't had time to prove itself yet. That's not fair to either of us. And if I told you I didn't want to go, he said quietly, not because of logistics, just because I don't want to be somewhere you're not. The silence after that was the longest yet. Then I'd tell you to make sure you actually mean that, she said, and not in the way where you mean it right now, but you'll resent it in 2 years. I know the difference. I know you do. I'm just asking you to be sure. Okay, he said. Okay, she echoed, then softer. Thank you for telling me first. Of course, he said, like there was never any other option, because there wasn't. He emailed Garrison and Holt on Thursday to thank them for the call and to let them know he'd decided to stay in his current market. He spent about 4 seconds second-guessing it after he hit send, and then it was done and he felt more than anything like himself. Which was probably the answer he'd had from the beginning and had needed the 2 days to locate. He didn't tell Olivia he'd turned it down immediately. He waited until that Saturday when they were at a diner in Hoboken eating breakfast at 11 a.m. in the particular unhurried way of people who have nowhere to be, and he said, between his eggs and her avocado toast, that she always pretended wasn't as good as a real breakfast. I turned down the Chicago thing. She looked up from her plate. When? Thursday. She set her fork down. Ethan, I know what you're going to say. You have no idea what I'm going to say. You're going to tell me I shouldn't have factored you into it. I was going to say... She stopped, looked at him. I was going to say, I'm glad you told me. She picked up her fork again. And also that you should always factor me in. I think I said the wrong thing Tuesday. You said the honest thing. Those aren't always the same. She stabbed a piece of avocado. I was trying not to be the person who holds you back, but I said it in a way that probably sounded like I was trying not to be the person who matters. And I do. Matter. To you. She glanced up. Right? Olivia. I'm not fishing. I'm establishing. You matter, he said. Significantly. You've mattered for 8 years and you matter considerably more now. She nodded once, like he'd confirmed something she'd known but needed to hear anyway. Then factor me in, she said. Just also factor in what you actually want, both things at the same time. That's what I did. Good. The avocado toast really isn't better than eggs. It's considerably better than eggs, and your insistence otherwise is a personal failing. He smiled at his plate, and she did too, and they finished breakfast with the particular ease of two people who had just navigated a real thing and come through it more or less intact, which was not nothing, and which neither of them underestimated. December arrived, and with it the particular pressure of the holiday season layered over ordinary life like an additional climate. Ethan's mother came in from Pennsylvania for a long weekend and took Maya to see the Rockefeller Christmas tree and a stage show Maya had been talking about since October, which freed up 2 evenings that Ethan spent with Olivia in ways that felt different from the careful, structured dates of the early weeks. More relaxed, more habitual, more like 2 people who'd stopped staging things and were just living in the same general orbit. They had an actual fight for the first time on a Wednesday night in mid-December. It started over something small, which was always how the real ones started. She'd mentioned, in passing, that she'd run into Marcus Webb at a client event the previous week. Marcus was someone she'd dated briefly 3 years ago, briefly being about 4 months, which was longer than most, and someone Ethan had a specific, previously unexamined feeling about that turned out, on examination, to be more complicated than he'd realized. "How is he?" Ethan said. His voice came out slightly flatter than intended. Olivia caught it. She caught most things. "Fine," she said carefully. "We talked for maybe 10 minutes. He's working with the Hartley Group now. Good for him." She set down her glass. "Okay, what is that?" "What is what?" "That tone. That flat. What is that?" "I don't have a tone." "Ethan, you absolutely have a tone." He was quiet for a second, which was its own kind of answer. "I don't love that you didn't mention it until now." She blinked. "It happened at a work event. It was a 10-minute conversation about industry stuff. I didn't think it was worth a notification." "I'm not asking for a notification." "Then what are you asking for?" "I don't know," he said, which was honest and also frustrating, which was the problem with being honest. I don't know why it bothers me, but it does." Olivia leaned back in her chair and looked at him with the expression she had when she was deciding whether to be patient or direct. She usually landed on direct. "Marcus is someone I dated for 4 months 3 years ago and haven't thought about since. There is nothing there. There was barely anything there when there was something there." She paused. "If you have a feeling, you can say it out loud, but don't be weird about it and then tell me you don't have a tone." He looked at his glass. "I'm not used to this. Being in a relationship? Being in something where I care this much about the details," he said, "where a random industry event even registers." He shook his head slightly. "It's not rational." "No, it's not. But it's real, and you can just say that." "I just said it. After I made you." She wasn't angry. She was something more pointed than that. Precise, like a surgeon. "I'm not going to manage your feelings for you, Ethan. If something bothers you, you have to say it. I can't navigate something I can't see." "I know." "Do you?" He looked at her. "I'm working on it." She held his gaze for a moment. Then something in her face shifted, not softening exactly, but adjusting. "You know what my actual worry is?" she said. "Tell me." "That you'll spend energy being bothered by things and not tell me, and I'll be walking around thinking everything's fine when it isn't, and 6 months from now something will have been building that I had no idea about." She folded her hands on the table. "I've done that. I've been on the receiving end of that. Someone managing their feelings in private, and then one day, boom. And I never even knew there was a problem." She paused. "I don't want that with you." "That's fair. I know it's fair. I'm asking if you hear it." "I hear it." He met her eyes. "And you're right. I should have just said something instead of going flat." "Yes, you should have." She reached across the table and flicked his hand, which was not a romantic gesture, but was somehow more effective than one. "Don't do the stoic thing with me. I know you well enough to know it's a defense mechanism, not a personality." "That's harsh." "It's accurate." He was quiet for a second. "You're annoying when you're right." "I am. I really am." She picked up her glass. "Are we okay?" "Yeah," he said. "We're okay." "Good." She took a sip. "Marcus is boring, for the record. He talked about his standing desk for 3 of the 10 minutes. His standing desk? At length, with opinions." "Okay," Ethan said. "I feel better about the whole thing." She gave him a look that was trying not to be a smile and failing. They ordered dessert and stayed another hour, and the evening recovered in the way of evenings between people who know how to fight cleanly, not without damage, but without lasting wreckage. He drove home thinking that the conversation, uncomfortable as it had been, had felt more like intimacy than the smooth ones did, like they'd passed through something and both come out knowing each other a degree better than before. He thought about what she'd said about managing feelings in private, about the one-day boom. He thought about his own tendency, which was real, which she'd identified accurately, to process internally and present conclusions rather than process out loud and involve someone else in the mess of the middle. He'd been doing it since before Maya, since long before Olivia, a habit built from years of being the person who held things together and therefore couldn't afford to be visibly falling apart. He was aware it was going to require work. He filed it under things to get better at. Christmas itself was fragmented the way it always was for Ethan. Maya's school break starting, his ex's parents wanting Maya for the week between Christmas and New Year, his own family doing their thing in Pennsylvania, the annual negotiation of logistics that came with being a single parent and a divorced one. He'd made peace with it, mostly. The fragmented holidays were the cost of the arrangement, and the arrangement was the best outcome they'd been able to build from a situation that hadn't been anyone's finest hour. He spent Christmas Eve with Maya and his mother, who'd come up from Pennsylvania again, and cooked a meal that was about 40% too ambitious and 100% made with effort. Maya had been vibrating with anticipation since roughly December 1st, and hit her peak emotional frequency somewhere around the moment she discovered that the dinosaur-themed science kit she'd wanted was actually under the tree, producing a reaction that could only be described as pure, distilled joy uncomplicated by anything adult. Ethan watched her tear through the wrapping paper and felt the specific fullness that only that particular small person produced in him, the feeling that whatever he'd gotten wrong in his life, he'd gotten this part right, or at least right enough. Olivia texted at 8 p.m. "Merry Christmas Eve, how's the chaos?" He texted back a photo of Maya sitting in a pile of wrapping paper with the science kit box on her head like a hat. The response was 3 laughing emojis, and then, "She is perfect. She's got a box on her head. I said what I said." He smiled at his phone. His mother, who noticed everything, noticed him smiling and said nothing, which was her way of saying a great deal. They talked about Christmas Day. He'd been invited, as always, to the Carter family's Christmas dinner. The invitation had come from Diane 2 weeks earlier in the form of a phone call that was technically addressed to him, but was really addressed to the situation. Diane's way of extending the family's arms around the new shape of things without making it a whole production. He'd said yes before he'd talked to Olivia about it, which she'd found out about and responded to with, "My mother invited you, and you said yes before telling me? Your mother has been inviting me to Christmas for 6 years, under different pretenses. The pretense was always the same. She just likes me more than most people she's related to." That's unfortunately true and does not address my point. He'd gone to Christmas dinner. It had been not different exactly, but different in the specific way of a thing that's always been a certain shape and has shifted slightly without changing its essential nature. Diane had hugged him at the door the same as always. Robert had shaken his hand the same as always. Olivia's Aunt Margot had talked too much about her various ailments the same as always. Sophie had been there, and Sophie had looked at the two of them for approximately 30 seconds on arrival, and then given Ethan a look that communicated, without any words, an entire paragraph's worth of pointed satisfaction. Ethan had chosen to examine a nearby poinsettia rather than engage with that look directly. Olivia, beside him, had pretended not to notice. She was not very convincing. Dinner itself was the Carter family's holiday in full expression. Too much food, several overlapping conversations, Diane's standing argument with her sister about whether the green bean casserole needed French fried onions or not, Robert trying to watch the end of a football game on the small kitchen TV while maintaining enough plausible deniability to avoid being called antisocial. Ethan sat where he always sat, ate more than he needed to, and washed dishes afterward because that was what he did, and the kitchen at the end of a Carter family dinner was always a meaningful project. Olivia came into the kitchen halfway through, leaned against the counter beside him, and handed him a dish towel without being asked. "You don't have to dry," he said. "I know." She picked up a serving bowl and dried it anyway. For a minute they worked in the comfortable parallel quiet that was one of their oldest fluencies. "My mother already loves you more than she loves me," she said eventually. "I want you to know that. Your mother loves you significantly. She loves you more. I find that hard to believe. She told me this morning that you were a good influence on me," her exact words. "And then she said I should keep you." Olivia set the bowl down. "As if you were a particularly successful houseplant." He laughed, for real. "What did you say?" "I said I was working on it." She was looking at the dish she was drying rather than at him. But he could hear the warmth in her voice, the unmanaged warmth, the kind she didn't dress up or translate. And then she hugged me for a long time and didn't explain why, which is very on brand for her. Diane Carter is a woman of depth. She's a woman of opinions, which is not always the same thing. She set down the dish. But yeah, sometimes it is. Sophie appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, ostensibly to retrieve a serving spoon. She found them at the sink the way she'd found them at the sink 2 months ago, and she stood there for a second with the serving spoon and an expression that she was making insufficient effort to neutralize. "What?" Olivia said without turning around. "Nothing," Sophie said. "Say the thing, Sophie." "I'm not saying a thing. You're standing in the doorway radiating smugness. Say the thing." Sophie leaned against the doorframe. "I just think it's interesting," she said, "that things finally make sense in here." "Don't," Olivia said. "I'm just saying." Sophie. "Merry Christmas," Sophie said pleasantly, retrieved her serving spoon, and disappeared back into the dining room. Ethan dried his hands on a dish towel. "She's never going to let this go. Not in our lifetimes, no." Olivia turned off the water. "She started a note on her phone. I saw it. It's called Told You So, with a date." The date being the night of the anniversary party. Olivia turned to look at him. "She has a timestamp." "I actually respect that," he said. "Don't tell her that. She'll get worse." He put the dish towel down and looked at her, at the way she looked in her parents' kitchen on Christmas Day, with the sounds of her family from the other room and a damp spot on her sleeve from the dishes, and her hair slightly less structured than usual. She looked like herself. She looked, specifically, like the version of herself she was only in a handful of places, with a handful of people. He was on that list. He had been for years. "Hey," he said. "Hey. Merry Christmas." She looked at him, and something in her face did the thing it did. The thing he'd been watching for 8 years and only recently allowed himself to actually see. The opening of something she kept carefully shut most of the time. "Merry Christmas," she said. He kissed her in the kitchen, briefly and without announcement, with her family 15 feet away on the other side of a wall, and she let him. And it was ordinary in the best possible way. The kind of ordinary that used to require construction and effort, and now just existed. "They can probably hear the silence in here," she said when they separated. "My mother has sonar." "Your mother knows." "My mother has known since approximately 2 years ago. She's been very patient." Smart woman. Infuriating woman. But she was smiling. She picked up the dish towel he'd set down and folded it neatly, the way she folded things, with the automatic precision of a person who imposes order on small things when the larger things feel uncertain. Then she set it on the counter and looked at it for a second. "Ethan." "Yeah." "I've been thinking about something." She didn't look at him yet. "About what I said in November, about being small on purpose." He waited. "I've been thinking about what I want." She looked up. "Not what I want to avoid, what I actually want, going forward." She paused. "And I want to stop. I want to stop doing things halfway. Professionally, I don't do anything halfway. But personally, I've always had one foot out the door. Always had the exit visible, just in case." She stopped. "I don't want to do that with you. I'm aware that sounds straightforward and is actually very hard for me." "I know it is," he said quietly. "I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that I'm trying. Not that I've figured it out, just that I'm trying." He looked at her for a moment, then, "Me too," he said. "The thing about processing internally, what you said in December, I'm working on it. Not there yet, but working on it." She nodded. "Okay." A breath. "Okay. That's enough for right now." "Yeah," he said. "It is." January came in with the particular bleakness of the Northeast in winter. Gray skies, dirty roadside snow, the post-holiday drop in ambient warmth that made everything feel slightly stripped of color. Ethan's apartment felt smaller in January. His commute felt longer. Maya had a 2-week stretch of waking up at 5:30 for reasons that remained medically unclear and temperamentally exhausting. And somewhere in the 3rd week of January, things got harder with Olivia in a way that crept up on them before either of them fully registered it happening. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quieter kind of hard. The erosion that happens when two busy people keep choosing other things first without meaning to, until they look up and realize there's been some distance accumulating without either of them authoring it directly. Her work intensified again in the new year. The new quarter bringing a new round of projects and 2 new clients whose demands were pulling her toward the 60-hour-week territory she'd been living in before the Mercer contract closed. His own job had a deadline crunch in January that ate 4 evenings he'd otherwise have spent differently. Maya's 5:30 wake-up schedule was running him down in ways that were affecting his patience and his ability to be present in the ways he wanted to be. They were still talking, still seeing each other, but the texture of it had changed, more perfunctory, more check-in than connection, the conversation shorter and the space between them slightly larger without anyone having made a decision to create that space. He noticed it on a Tuesday night in the 3rd week of January when he called her after Maya was asleep, and the conversation lasted 11 minutes, which was about a third of their usual, and afterward he sat with his phone in his hand feeling like he'd missed something without knowing what. He called her back. "Hey," she said, surprised. "Did you forget something?" "No, that felt short." A pause. "Yeah," she said. "It did. Are we okay?" Another pause, longer. "I think we're both tired," she said. "I think January is doing the thing January does." "That's not an answer." "I know." He heard her shift, the sound of a chair, maybe sitting down. "Honestly, I've been in my head this week. Work is a lot right now, and when work is a lot, I tend to go internal," he finished. "Yeah. Okay, so tell me, what's going on? She exhaled, and then she talked, really talked, the way she hadn't in the past week, about the new client who was proving to be significantly more demanding than they'd appeared in the pitch process, about the team dynamics that were creating friction she hadn't anticipated, about a decision she had to make by Friday about resourcing that had no good answer, only less bad ones. She talked for 20 minutes without him saying much, and he listened the way he knew how to listen, and by the time she wound down, her voice had the slightly looser quality of someone who'd been holding something and had finally set it on a flat surface. "I've been doing it again," she said. "The going small thing, pulling in. I know. I don't always know when I'm doing it until I'm already doing it. I know that too. You should probably call me on it faster." "You should probably not need me to," he said. "But yes, noted. I'll call it faster." She made a sound that was somewhere between exasperated and fond. "You're very annoying about being balanced. Someone has to be. It shouldn't always be you. You're working on it," he said. "That's enough." A pause. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "I'm not going anywhere." She said it simply, without decoration. "I want to be clear about that. When I go quiet, it's not about you. It's a habit that predates you and that I'm actively fighting. But it's not about you." "I know," he said. And he did. That was the thing. He'd known her long enough to have the context for her patterns, to understand the difference between her pulling away and her being pulled. It was one of the things she'd said mattered, the knowing. "Good," she said. "Okay." A breath. "Thank you for calling back." "Of course. I mean it. Thank you for—" She stopped. "For not letting the 11 minutes be the end of the night." "I'm paying attention," he said quietly. "That's all." She was quiet for a moment, then, "That's not a small thing. I know you know that, but I want to say it anyway. It's not a small thing." "I know," he said. "Neither are you." They talked for another hour. By the end of it, the space that had been accumulating had closed again. Not entirely, but enough. And he went to bed feeling like himself again, in a way he hadn't for the better part of a week. He lay in the dark for a while thinking about attention, about the difference between being present and being there, about how much of a relationship, any relationship, was just the practice of choosing to look directly at someone instead of through them. He'd been doing it for 8 years without calling it what it was. Now he was calling it what it was. He was tired, and his daughter was going to wake up at 5:30, and he had a project deadline on Thursday, and none of that was going to stop being true tomorrow. But under all of it, settled and stubborn, was the specific certainty of a person who knows something real when they've found it. He slept. Outside, January kept being January, gray and cold and indifferent. Inside, something that had started on a set of back steps in October was still building, quietly and imperfectly, into the shape of something that lasted. February arrived without ceremony, the way February always did. Quietly, grayly, with the particular stubbornness of a month that everyone wanted to be over before it had properly begun. The cold had settled into the kind of persistent that stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like a condition, and the city wore it the way cities do, with resignation and decent coats. Ethan had stopped counting weeks somewhere around the middle of January. Not because things had become less important, but because the counting had started to feel like a kind of monitoring, like he was checking the structural integrity of something every few days instead of just living inside it. He'd made a quiet decision to stop doing that, to stop treating what he and Olivia were building like a construction project under constant inspection and start treating it like a life, which was messier and less measurable and considerably more real. The practical shape of things had shifted by February in ways that had happened gradually enough that he only noticed when he looked back. Olivia had a drawer at his apartment, not a designated, ceremonially offered drawer. It had just happened, the way things accumulated when someone was at a place often enough. A change of clothes, a phone charger that was functionally hers because she'd left it 4 weeks ago, and neither of them had made a move to return it. Her preferred brand of coffee, which was different from his, now lived on the second shelf next to his. He noticed the coffee one morning in early February while making 2 cups instead of 1, and found himself standing in the kitchen in the gray pre-7 a.m. light, with a faint smile that he didn't bother to account for. Maya had her own relationship with the Olivia situation, which was evolving at the pace of a 6-year-old's internal clock, non-linear, occasionally puzzling, and operated entirely on her own schedule. She'd asked in December with the blunt directness that was her signature, "Is Olivia your girlfriend?" Ethan had been tying her shoes at the time and had taken a moment to consider his answer with appropriate care. "She's someone I really care about," he said. "Like a girlfriend, yeah." Maya had processed this for approximately 3 seconds. "Does she know about the solar system project?" "I told her about the solar system project." "She knows." "Does she know Neptune was too big?" "I mentioned it." Maya had nodded, satisfied, and the conversation had concluded. She'd returned to it twice since then, both times with specific follow-up questions that had nothing to do with the emotional complexity of her father's romantic life, and everything to do with practical information she'd decided she needed. Did Olivia like dinosaurs? She'd been informed that Olivia found them interesting but was not an expert, which Maya had accepted as a reasonable starting position. And did Olivia know how to play Go Fish? She did not, and Maya had already decided she would teach her. The Go Fish lesson had occurred on a Saturday in January at the kitchen table, with Maya explaining the rules at a pace and level of detail that suggested she was considering a future in instruction. Olivia had received this tutorial with genuine seriousness, asked 2 clarifying questions, and won the first hand, which Maya had greeted with the resigned respect of someone recognizing a competitor. "She's a fast learner," Maya had told Ethan afterward, with authority. "She is," he'd agreed. "I like her," Maya said, in the specific tone of a child issuing a formal verdict. Then she'd gone back to her dinosaur book, and the matter was apparently settled. He hadn't told Olivia right away. He'd thought about it for a day, turning it over, this small and enormous thing his daughter had said in the middle of a Saturday afternoon like it cost nothing. And then that night he'd called Olivia and said, "Maya told me she likes you today, for what it's worth." The silence on the other end had lasted long enough that he'd said her name. "I'm here," she said. Her voice was different, thinner, he thought, or maybe more careful. "I'm just—" She stopped. "That means a lot, Ethan. I want you to know that I don't take it lightly. I know you don't." "She's—" Another pause. "She's everything. She's clearly everything to you. And the fact that she exhaled. "Yeah, that means a lot." He'd let her have the silence after that, and they'd sat on the phone without talking for a minute. And it had been one of the more honest moments they'd had, which was saying something. Just it. The real trouble came on a Thursday night in the second week of February, and it came from a place he hadn't been watching. He'd known that Olivia's board included people with opinions. That was the nature of a board. Her company had 4 external board members, brought in at a Series A round 2 years earlier, and while she had majority control and ran her company with the autonomy she'd fought specifically to preserve, the board members had views, and they expressed them at quarterly meetings, and occasionally between meetings in ways that were not always comfortable. One of them, a man named Richard Calloway, who had made his money in old-school enterprise software, and had opinions about how businesses should be run that were rooted in an era Olivia was not interested in replicating, had been pushing for the better part of 6 months for the company to bring in a COO. His stated reasoning was operational scalability. His actual reasoning, as far as Olivia could tell, was that he was not entirely comfortable with her running the whole operation alone, and did not know how to say so without saying so. She'd been managing this dynamic for months, with the particular skill of someone who knew how to handle difficult stakeholders without giving them what they wanted or making enemies they couldn't afford. She'd been doing it, largely, without Ethan seeing the full weight of it, because she had a tendency, her own acknowledged tendency, the one she was working on, to compress the hard things when she told them, to present them at lower voltage than they were actually running. So when she arrived at his apartment on that Thursday night, with the expression he'd learned to read as the surface of something much worse, he caught it immediately. "Sit down," he said. "I'll get dinner started. Talk." She sat at the kitchen counter and talked. Calloway had called an emergency board meeting. Not a full session, just a call, but the framing was significant. He'd brought another board member with him, a woman named Patricia Osei, who'd been neutral until recently and appeared to have shifted. Together they were pushing hard for the COO hire, and they had a candidate, someone Calloway had apparently already been in conversations with without telling Olivia, which was the part that was burning her. The breach of the thing she'd always maintained was sacred about the company's direction. "He's already talking to someone," she said. "He went and had conversations with a candidate without telling me, and now he's bringing it to the board as if it's a fait accompli. As if I'm going to sit in a room and be presented with someone he chose and just—" She stopped. Her hands were flat on the counter. "I built this. I built every piece of it from a freelance project in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hoboken. I have not spent 5 years doing that to be managed by someone Richard Calloway found through his golf network." Ethan was at the stove, and he kept his hands moving, onions in the pan, the small productive management of something, because he'd learned that she talked better when he wasn't looking at her directly in moments like this. When he looked at her, she edited for him. When he was doing something else, she said the real thing. "What does your lawyer say?" he asked. "Haven't called her yet. I wanted to think first." "Think out loud, then." She thought out loud. He listened, asking occasional questions that were pointed enough to be useful without steering her. What specifically did the shareholder agreement say about executive hires? What was the actual board vote threshold? Had she talked to the other 2 board members individually? She had answers for most of it, and working through them, she found her footing the way she usually did, through the problem itself, using the analytical part of her brain that was formidable when she let it run without panic underneath it. By the time the pasta was done, she'd arrived at her next 3 moves. "You need to call Patricia Osei before the meeting," he said, setting a bowl in front of her. "Not after. Before, and one-on-one, because she shifted, and you need to understand why before you're in a room with Calloway when he controls the framing." "I know." She picked up a fork. "You're right. And you need to document the Calloway conversations with the candidate. That's a governance issue. That's not nothing." "I know that too." "So you knew both of those things before you told me?" She looked at him. "I needed to say them to someone before I could be sure they were right." She paused. "That's what you're for." "I'm honored to be what you're for." "Don't be smug." "I'm not smug. I'm useful. There's a difference." She almost smiled. She ate some pasta. The pan on the stove had been turned off and the kitchen was warm, and the sound outside was the usual street noise of a Hoboken Thursday, and the specific disaster of Richard Calloway and his unsanctioned candidate searches was still exactly as bad as it had been an hour ago. But she had a plan now, and a bowl of pasta, and someone across the table who wasn't flinching at the weight of it. "I hate that he got in my head," she said. "That's the part I hate most. Not even the practical problem. The fact that I drove over here feeling like my hands were shaking." "Your hands weren't shaking. Internally they were." "That's allowed," he said. "That's just being human." She looked at him. "I don't like being human sometimes." "I know. You're very good at it anyway." "That's a strange thing to say." "It's true. Being good at something you don't like is still being good at it." She sat with that for a second. Then she went back to her pasta. "Thank you for dinner." "Any time." "I mean it. I mean—" She stopped. Something shifted in her expression. "I don't always say thank you for the specific things. I say it generally, but this—" She gestured at the counter, the kitchen, the fact of the evening. Thank you for this, for just letting me walk in and talk and not making it a whole thing. It's not a whole thing. I know. That's what I'm thanking you for. He understood what she meant. He understood it precisely, and he didn't dress it up or deflect it. He just nodded once, and she nodded back, and they finished dinner. She called Patricia Osei the next morning. She called her lawyer the afternoon of the same day. The board situation took 3 weeks to resolve, and it resolved in Olivia's favor. Not because she steamrolled Calloway, but because she was better at this than he was, and had learned a long time ago that the boardroom was not won through force, but through precision, through making the other person feel heard while strategically removing every alternative to the conclusion you'd already reached. The COO discussion was tabled. The candidate Calloway had been talking to was quietly dropped. Patricia Osei, after 2 long conversations with Olivia, in which Olivia actually listened to the underlying concerns instead of the surface demands, came back to neutral and then incrementally passed it. Calloway remained Calloway. That was not a solvable problem, but solvable and manageable were different categories, and she'd always been better at managing than she gave herself credit for. She told Ethan when it was done with the text that said, "Tabled, Osei's back. Calloway is sulking but structurally contained." He wrote back, "I never had any doubt." She wrote, "Liar." He wrote, "Okay, I had 7% doubt, but the other 93 was solid." Her response was a single laughing emoji and nothing else, which was, he had come to understand, her version of saying something warm. Valentine's Day fell on a Saturday that year, which was either convenient or inconvenient, depending on your perspective and the particular pressures of your life. Ethan had a 6-year-old with strong opinions about holidays. Maya had been informed by a classmate that Valentine's Day required candy and the making of cards, and had taken this information seriously. And Olivia had made a face when the holiday came up in conversation that suggested she had complicated feelings about it. "It's a commercial pressure holiday," she said. "It's an excuse to eat chocolate and tell someone you like them. I tell you I like you without a calendar prompt. Then Valentine's Day should be easy." She'd given him a look. "What are you proposing?" "Nothing elaborate. Dinner at mine, Maya makes you a card because she's already decided she's making you a card, and I'm not going to be the person who tells her not to. And then she goes to bed and we have the rest of the evening." "Maya's making me a card?" "She started it 3 days ago. It has significant amounts of glitter." Something crossed Olivia's face that she didn't entirely manage to keep neutral. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, okay." Maya's card was made of red construction paper, folded in half, with a dinosaur drawn on the front, a triceratops, her signature, wearing what appeared to be a small hat, and the words, "Happy Valentine's Day." Olivia written in large, careful letters inside, followed by a significant quantity of adhesive glitter stars, and a drawing of what Maya explained was a heart, but which, in execution, resembled more of an irregular oval. Olivia received it at the door with Maya presenting it with both hands, and the particular solemnity of someone delivering an important document. Olivia crouched down to Maya's level. She looked at the card for a moment, at the triceratops in the hat, at the glitter, at the careful irregular letters. Then she looked at Maya. "This is the best card I've ever gotten," she said, and she said it the way she said things when she meant them, without performance. Maya evaluated this claim. "Better than from my dad. Your dad is going to have to work very hard to top this." Maya accepted this as both accurate and fair, and went back to her important project of deciding which of her dinosaur figures got to sit on the windowsill. Olivia stood up and found Ethan in the kitchen doorway, watching both of them with an expression he wasn't trying to hide. She crossed the kitchen and kissed him quickly, her hand on his arm. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "You okay?" "Yeah, She glanced back at Maya, who had lined up 4 dinosaurs on the windowsill and was now conducting what appeared to be a silent arbitration among them. "Yeah, I really am." Dinner was simple. He'd made her favorite again, the roasted chicken, partly because it was good, and partly because he was aware he'd started to build a small vocabulary of things she returned to, and that vocabulary felt like its own kind of language. Maya ate with them and told Olivia extensively about a conflict at school involving a disputed sandbox territory, which Olivia mediated with the seriousness it deserved, offering what she called a compromise framework that Maya considered seriously and partially implemented. At 7:30, Maya went to bed without the usual negotiation, which Ethan would later attribute to the accumulated social energy of the evening running her down. He came back from bedtime to find Olivia at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of wine already poured, looking at her phone. She looked up when he came in. "She went down fast," he said. "She ran a full diplomatic operation over dinner. That's tiring work." He sat across from her, picked up his wine glass. Outside, the February night was doing what February nights did, cold and quiet. The street below moving slowly. Inside, the kitchen was warm, dishes still on the counter because he'd left them, the particular settled quality of an evening that had been lived in. "Can I say something?" Olivia said. "Yeah." She turned her wine glass slowly, looking at it rather than him for a moment. "I've been thinking about something for a few weeks, and I haven't said it because I wasn't sure how to. Or maybe because I was waiting until it felt right." She looked up. "I'm not sure those are different things." "Say it." "I'm in this," she said. "Fully. Not with one foot near the door. Not in the provisional, carefully managed way I've been in things before." She held his gaze. "I don't know what that looks like in the future, concretely. I'm not making a specific declaration, but I want you to know that this is not something I'm hedging. I've stopped hedging." He looked at her. "What made you stop?" She considered the question seriously. "A lot of things." She paused. "Maya's card, tonight, the way she handed it to me, the way it felt to matter to her specifically in that way." She set down the glass. "And watching you be her father, over months, not just the good days, the 5:30 mornings and the sick days, and the way you still show up for everything else on top of it. I've been watching you do all of that and thinking about what it means that I don't want to be on the outside of your life. Not even the careful outer ring of it." She paused. "I want to be in it. I want to actually be in it." He sat with that. The specific weight of it, what she was saying and what it cost her to say it, given everything he knew about what the inside of her life had looked like before. The careful management of distance, the exit always visible. "You are in it," he said. "You've been in it. But I hear you saying something different. I'm saying I'm choosing it, intentionally, with eyes open." She met his gaze. "I'm choosing this. You, Maya, the whole complicated actual thing. Not because it's convenient or because it evolved and I was too close to step back, because I want it." He was quiet for a moment. "Olivia." "I know," she said. "I know it's February and we've been at this since October, and it's probably early to be—" "Stop," he said. "Don't talk yourself out of it while you're saying it." She closed her mouth. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. "I've wanted this since before I let myself know I wanted it," he said. "I'm not keeping score on timelines. You saying it now means exactly as much as it would mean in a year." He paused. "More, maybe. Because you saying it costs you something." She turned her hand under his and held it. "It does," she said, quietly. "It does cost something." "I know." He looked at her. "So does this. I'm in it too. Fully." She exhaled, long, steady, the kind of breath that releases something that's been held. She didn't cry. That wasn't Olivia, or not in this context. She felt things hard and kept them internal, and what showed was only the edges. But the edges were enough. He knew how to read the edges. They stayed at the kitchen table for a long time after that, talking and not talking in the way they'd always been able to, the conversation moving between things that mattered and things that didn't, and the line between those two categories was blurry, in the good way of evenings where you stop distinguishing. She told him about a memory she'd had recently, something from college, her first real job out of school, the specific fear of those early days when the company didn't exist yet and was just an idea she kept turning over, not knowing if it was delusion or instinct. How she'd called her mother on a Wednesday night from her Hoboken apartment and said, "What if I'm wrong about this?" And her mother had said, "Then you'll be wrong, and you'll figure out what's next." Not reassurance, just practicality, just, "You'll get through it either way, so go ahead." "That's very Diane," Ethan said. "She's not big on comfort that's just noise," Olivia said. "She's big on actual help." She paused. "I think that's where I get it from, the trying to actually solve things. You get it from her, and from Robert. You got his patience too, when you let yourself use it." She looked slightly surprised, the way she did when he said something about her that she hadn't assembled herself. He'd appreciate hearing that. Tell him sometime. Maybe I will. She tilted her head slightly. He's always liked you, since the beginning. I know. I've always liked him. He told me once, a few years ago, that the mark of someone worth having around is whether they make things better or just different. She paused. He was talking about something else at the time, in theory, but he was looking at you when he said it. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He turned that over quietly, Robert Carter's particular kind of communication, the oblique, the said in passing, the statement that carried more weight than it announced. I didn't know he'd said that, he said finally. I didn't tell you. She met his eyes. I wasn't ready to tell you what it meant that he'd said it. He understood what she was telling him now, that the conversation with her father had registered in her at a time when she was already feeling something she wasn't ready to examine, that Robert Carter, in his quiet way, had named something she'd been carrying without vocabulary for it. Your family, he said, has been several steps ahead of both of us this whole time. They really have. She shook her head slightly. It's profoundly irritating. Sophie has a timestamp. Sophie has a timestamp and a told you so note, and she texted me on New Year's Day to say that she was adding the date of our first official date to her records for completeness. I'm actually going to frame that note someday, as an artifact. Don't encourage her. Too late, he said. I texted her a thumbs up on New Year's Day. Olivia stared at him. You what? In appreciation of her record keeping. Ethan. She's been right the whole time. She deserves acknowledgement. She's going to be absolutely impossible to live with for the next decade. Worth it, he said. She looked at him for a second. Then she laughed. The real laugh, the full face one, the one that took over and closed her eyes for a second. He watched it the way he always watched it, and felt the thing he always felt, which was something like the specific relief of a person who has found the thing they didn't know they were looking for, but recognizes it unmistakably on arrival. She stood up eventually because it was past 11 and she had an early morning. She gathered her things the way she did. Efficient, slightly scattered, in the way she was always slightly scattered with personal things, even while being precise about work things, finding her phone charger on the counter and her jacket from the chair, and the card Maya had made her, which she tucked carefully into her bag. He walked her to the door. Thank you for tonight, she said. Happy Valentine's Day. Don't be sincere about Valentine's Day. It undermines your credibility. I'm sincere about you on Valentine's Day, the holiday I can take or leave. She looked at him in the doorway, with her jacket half on and Maya's card in her bag, and the hallway light doing the unflattering thing hallway lights do, and she was tired and real and completely, unceremoniously herself. And he felt it the way he'd been feeling it for months now, without diminishment, that settling, solid thing that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with truth. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. Yeah, he said. You will. She kissed him at the door, longer than the usual quick goodbye, her hand on his face for a second before she stepped back. Then she went down the hall to the elevator, and he stood in the doorway until the elevator doors closed, and he went back inside to the quiet of his apartment. The dishes were still on the counter. Maya's extra dinosaur figures were still on the windowsill, 4 of them in a row, standing guard. The 2 wine glasses were still on the kitchen table. He stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at the evidence of the evening, all the small material proof of people who were building something in the ordinary, physical, real way of lives being lived together, and felt the specific, unglamorous, deeply rooted thing that he had stopped trying to name and had started simply letting be. He washed the dishes. He turned off the lights. He went to bed with the particular ease of a person who knows where they are. Whooped. March came. The gray started breaking, not all at once. The Northeast didn't do anything gracefully in the transition from winter to spring. It did it in fits and starts. A warm week followed by a brutal cold snap. The trees confused and the people on the street alternating between coats and not coats with the resigned flexibility of people who'd been through this before. Ethan's company offered him a new role in mid-March. An internal promotion, project director, more of the substantive work he'd been wanting more of and less of, the administrative overhead that had been wearing at him. He took it. He told Olivia the same day, and she said, finally, they've been underusing you for 2 years, which was both slightly arrogant on his behalf and also correct. Olivia hired a COO in March, not the person Calloway had found. someone she'd identified herself, a woman named Jess Huang, who'd run operations at two smaller firms and came with the specific combination of operational rigor and startup flexibility that Olivia had been looking for without realizing she was looking. The decision had come from Olivia herself, on her own timeline, in response to her own recognition that she couldn't scale what she'd built alone. She told Ethan about it over the phone on a Tuesday night with the tone of someone who had resolved an internal argument they'd been losing.
"It's not giving up control," she said, slightly defensively. "I know. It's strategic delegation, which is different. Olivia, I know. You're not going to tell me it's the right move. You already know it's the right move. You made it. You don't need me to validate it." A pause. "I hate when you do that." "What?" "Treat me like I already know the answer. It's annoyingly accurate. It's the most useful thing I do."
She was quiet for a second.
"It really is," she said finally, less combative. "It really is." Spring was coming. Not here yet, but coming. The particular feeling in the air of something on the verge of arriving, the way the light started changing before the temperature did. Ethan felt it on his morning commute, in the 10 extra minutes of light at the end of the day, in Maya's increasing insistence on playing outside after school, even when outside was still technically cold. He felt it in other ways too, slower, less meteorological. The feeling of a life that had been slightly contracted. The careful life of a man managing things alone, keeping the circle tight, protecting what mattered by keeping it small. Beginning to expand. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would notice from the outside, but in the way he could feel from the inside, in the difference between living in a space that had room in it and living in a space that didn't. He hadn't lost anything. That was what he'd feared, some version of that expanding meant subtracting, that letting someone further in meant something else had to give. But the accounting didn't work that way. Maya was the same Maya, the same fierce, bright, dinosaur-obsessed particular person she'd always been, and she had more warmth in her orbit now, not less. His friendships were the same. His work was, if anything, better for the first time in 2 years. And Olivia was herself. Difficult and precise and funny in the dry, specific way of someone who noticed things, still navigating the gap between her public competence and her private uncertainty with the imperfect, ongoing effort of someone who knew the gap existed and was doing something about it. Still sometimes pulling in when she was overwhelmed, though she caught it faster now and said something before he had to ask. Still occasionally arriving at his door looking like someone who'd been carrying too many grocery bags. Still eating the salmon, even though she always regretted the salmon. He loved her. He was aware of that with the same uncomplicated clarity. He was aware of most things he'd had a long time to understand. He hadn't said it yet. Neither had she. That particular word was still in the territory ahead of them, which was fine. There was no expiration date on saying the true thing, and the true thing didn't require the words to exist. But it was there. It had been there for longer than October, longer than the anniversary party, longer maybe than he could precisely locate. It had been there in the accumulated weight of 8 years of small moments that didn't feel small at all. He just hadn't known, for a long time, what to call it. He was calling it what it was now. Quietly, internally. With the specific patience of a man who'd learned the difference between holding something and hiding it. There was a difference. He was done hiding. Spring arrived the way it always did in New Jersey. Not all at once, not gracefully, but insistently, pushing through the last stubborn weeks of cold with the patient aggression of something that knew it was going to win. By April, the trees along Ethan's street had gone from bare to tentatively green, the kind of green that looked uncertain at first and then committed suddenly, seemingly overnight, so that you'd walk outside one morning and the world had changed its mind about winter without telling you it was considering it. Ethan noticed the change on a Saturday morning in early April, standing on his small balcony with his first cup of coffee while Maya slept late for once. A genuine miracle, unrequested and therefore more appreciated. And thinking about the particular quality of that morning, the light and the air and the accumulated sense of a long stretch of something finally arriving somewhere. He'd been doing that more lately, noticing things. Not in the self-conscious way of someone who's decided to practice gratitude as a lifestyle intervention, but in the quieter way of a person whose interior life had more room in it than it used to, and who was, somewhat to his own surprise, using that room. He was thinking about the word he hadn't said yet, not because he was afraid of it. He'd passed through afraid somewhere around February and come out the other side into something different, Not fearlessness exactly, but a kind of settled willingness that didn't require the absence of risk to function. He was thinking about it because he was trying to find the right moment, and he'd been aware long enough of the way Olivia received things to know that the moment mattered. Not a production, not something staged. She'd see through staged in about 30 seconds, and it would land wrong, and this particular thing deserved to land right. He was still thinking about it when his phone buzzed on the balcony railing. Olivia, are you awake? Him. Standing on the balcony, Maya's still asleep. It's a historic morning. Olivia, I need to tell you something. Can I come over? He looked at that for a second. Can I come over on a Saturday morning before 9 a.m. was not her standard operating mode. She was a person who treated weekend mornings as recovery time, guarding them with the same intentionality she applied to everything else. Him. Yeah. Come. She arrived 40 minutes later, which meant she'd already been on her way when she texted. She was in jeans and a gray pullover, her hair not yet fully organized, and she had a coffee from the place on the corner that she'd clearly stopped for on the way up, which told him she'd had the presence of mind to caffeinate, but not the patience to make it at home, which told him she'd been up for a while and had been thinking. He opened the door before she knocked. You were in the hallway, she said. I heard the elevator. She looked at him. Then she stepped inside and he closed the door behind her and they stood in the front hallway for a moment. And she was doing the thing she did when she was carrying something, not quite meeting his eyes, processing, finding the entry point. Sit down, he said, or don't. Whatever helps. She didn't sit down. She stood in his kitchen and put her coffee on the counter and looked at it for a second. My mother called me last night, she said. Late. She doesn't usually call late. He waited. My father had a chest episode, not a heart attack. They're saying it was a significant arrhythmia. He's okay. He's been okay since about 10 p.m. They've got him on monitoring and they ran tests and the cardiologist thinks it's manageable. He's okay. She said it the way people say things when they need to say the good part quickly because the rest of it is still frightening. But my mother was very calm on the phone, and that was somehow worse than if she'd been crying, because she's only that calm when she's using all of herself to stay calm. Okay, Ethan said. Where is he now? Still at the hospital for observation. They'll probably release him today. She finally looked at him. Sophie drove down last night. I went this morning. I was there from midnight to about 4. And then he told me to go home and sleep, in the exact tone he uses when he means it, and there's no use arguing. So you went home. I went home and I stared at the ceiling until 6, and then I called you. She exhaled. He's okay. I need to keep saying that or I'll spiral. He's okay, Ethan said. Say it as many times as you need to. She looked at him, and he could see the whole night in her face. The controlled fear, the hospital waiting room, the particular exhaustion that came not from physical tiredness, but from the sustained effort of being the capable one in a situation where you desperately didn't want to have to be. He crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her. She held on. That was the thing about Olivia that most people didn't see. Under the capability and the competence and the careful management of herself, she held on when she needed to hold on. She just needed to trust someone enough to do it, and she trusted him, had trusted him for years in ways she was only recently allowing to be fully visible. They stood in the kitchen for a while. He didn't say anything useful. There was nothing useful to say. He just stayed there, which was what was needed. Eventually, she pulled back. Not all at once. By degrees. The way you move out of the thing that's been holding you up when you're not entirely sure your legs are reliable yet. I'm sorry, she said. Stop. I know you had plans this morning. Olivia, stop apologizing. She stopped. She picked up her coffee and held it with both hands and leaned against the counter. He leaned against the opposite counter and let her have the silence. I realized something last night, she said. In the hospital, sitting next to my mother while my father slept. She looked at the coffee cup. I realized I've spent so much of my life being the person who handles things that I've had almost no practice being the person who needs someone. And last night, she stopped. Last night I needed someone, and the person I wanted was you, not my sister, not my mother, not a friend. You. She paused, and I was already on the phone with you before I'd consciously made that decision. My hands just did it. He was quiet. That's the thing I wanted to tell you, she said.
That's why I came over instead of just calling." She finally met his eyes. "Because I think that means something. I think when your hands know something before your brain does, that's worth paying attention to." He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, and the gray pullover and the coffee she'd bought herself on the way over because she was still, even exhausted, taking care of the small practical things. He looked at her and thought about 8 years and a birthday barbecue in Brooklyn and a kitchen in Westfield on a night in October and all the accumulation between then and now, and he thought about the word he'd been carrying around looking for the right moment to say. This was the right moment. Not because it was perfect, it was the opposite of perfect. She was exhausted, and her father had been in the hospital 6 hours ago, and she was standing in his kitchen in a gray pullover holding a to-go coffee. Precisely because it was not perfect. Because the true thing didn't need the right lighting. It just needed to be said to the right person at the right time, and the right time, he understood now, was whenever it was most true. "Olivia," he said. She looked at him. "I love you." He said it the way he meant it, plainly, without staging, with the full weight of what it had taken 8 years and several important conversations and a considerable amount of fear overcome to arrive at. "I've probably loved you for a long time and called it other things. But that's what it is, and I wanted you to know." She looked at him for a moment. He watched something move through her face, not surprise, not quite, more like the look of someone who's heard a sound they've been straining to hear for a long time and has finally, fully made it out. She set her coffee cup down. "I love you too," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say that for months." She paused. "It turns out you just say it." "You just say it," he agreed. She laughed, short and slightly undone, and came across the kitchen and kissed him, and it was nothing like the first kiss on the back steps. That one had been gentle and tentative and full of the fragility of something just beginning. This one was different. This one had weight behind it. The accumulated weight of everything that had come between then and now, the fights and the late-night phone calls, and the January distance and the board meetings, and the Valentine's Day card with glitter dinosaurs, and the Saturday morning in a hospital waiting room, and all the ordinary Thursday evenings that built the architecture of a life together. From down the hallway came the sound of small feet on hardwood. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, her hair doing the architectural thing it did in the morning, holding her stuffed triceratops under one arm, and looking at both of them with the neutral assessment of someone who had just woken up and was cataloging the situation. "Are you kissing?" she said. Ethan and Olivia separated by approximately 1 inch. "Good morning, Maya," Ethan said. Maya considered the scene. "Do we have pancakes?" "We can have pancakes." "Okay." She looked at Olivia. "Did you sleep here?" "No," Olivia said. "I came early." "Because of Grandpa Robert?" Ethan looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Maya. "How do you know about that?" "Daddy texted Grandma Diane this morning. I saw it when I got his phone to play the dinosaur app." She said this without any sense of having done anything wrong, with the complete pragmatic transparency of a 6-year-old who saw no meaningful distinction between her father's phone and any other household object. "Is he okay?" "He's okay," Olivia said. "He's going home today." Maya absorbed this. "Good." She turned to Ethan. "Blueberry pancakes. You want to help?" "Yes." She was already moving toward the cabinet where the mixing bowls lived. She knew where everything lived. She'd known for a while. Robert Carter came home from the hospital that afternoon, as predicted. Diane had called Olivia at 11 with the update, her voice carrying the particular relief of someone who'd been holding something heavy and had just been allowed to set it down. And Olivia had relayed it to Ethan over the kitchen counter while Maya carefully measured flour with the concentration of a small scientist. "He's already annoyed about the dietary restrictions they gave him," Olivia said. "My mother says he's been complaining about the sodium guidelines for 20 minutes. "That's how you know he's fine," Ethan said. "Complaining requires energy." She said exactly that. Olivia smiled, and it was the real smile, the full one, the one that meant the fear had actually released. "She also said to tell you thank you." "Diane doesn't need to thank me. She said to tell you anyway." Her words were... Olivia paused, apparently recalling it precisely. She said, "Tell that boy he's been a good thing for this family for years, and I'm glad we finally stopped pretending we didn't all know it." He was quiet for a moment. "She said that boy," Olivia added. "She knows you're 32. It's a term of affection." "It absolutely is." She looked at him across the counter. She's right, you know. Whatever she said, she's right. He didn't answer that directly. He reached over and stole a piece of the banana Maya had been saving for the pancake batter. And Maya said "Daddy" in the exact tone of exasperated authority she'd been perfecting since approximately age 4, and the morning continued. They drove out to Westfield in the early afternoon, the three of them, because Olivia wanted to see her father, and because it turned out there was no longer any question about whether Ethan would come. The question had stopped existing sometime in the months between October and now, without anyone making a formal announcement. He was part of how Olivia moved through her life, and her family was part of his. And the logistics of that were not complicated because neither of them made them complicated. Maya fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes into the drive, Triceratops tucked under her arm, her head against the window in the slightly precarious way of a child who would deny that she'd been sleeping the moment she woke up. Ethan drove and Olivia had her feet up on the dash, a habit he'd long since stopped mentioning, and they talked quietly about nothing in particular, the low-stakes conversation of people who'd run out of things to prove to each other. "What did your mother mean," he said at one point, "about pretending not to know?" Olivia glanced at him. "Exactly what she said. She's been watching us for years. She had opinions long before I did, or before I admitted I did." She paused. "She told me once, maybe 3 years ago. She said, 'The way that boy looks at you is the way your father looks at me.' And I told her she was projecting. A beat. I was not entirely honest with myself about that at the time." He kept his eyes on the road. "The way your father looks at her." "Yeah," quietly. "I thought it was a mother thing to say. The romantic overstatement of a person who wanted her daughter to find something specific." She turned to look out the window. "But then I thought about it later, by myself, and I knew she was right. And I didn't do anything about it for 2 more years. Fear's efficient that way." "Yeah." She was quiet for a second. "I wasted time. We both did. I wasted more." "Olivia, I'm not beating myself up. I'm just accounting for it honestly." She turned back. "I spent years telling myself I was being careful, being smart, not rushing into something for the wrong reasons. And some of that was true. But mostly I was just scared. And I used the language of pragmatism to make it sound like wisdom." She paused. "That's a habit I want to be done with, in general. Not just with you." He thought about the version of that in himself, the ways he'd also hidden behind reasonable-sounding justifications, the protecting of what they had that was also the refusing to reach for what it could be. They'd both done it. The particular cowardice of 2 intelligent people who'd made the same mistake from different directions. "I think we're done with it," he said. "I think we've been done with it for a while." "Yeah," she said. "I think so too." Maya woke up exactly as they pulled off the Garden State Parkway, with the unerring timing of a child whose body clock was calibrated to meaningful arrivals. She surfaced from sleep without preamble, announced that she was hungry, and asked how far away Grandma Diane's house was, with the specific urgency of someone for whom time is still an elastic and unreliable concept. 5 minutes, Ethan told her. "How many sleeps is that?" "It's not a sleep situation, it's a minutes situation." "How many minutes in a sleep?" That's not really how it works, Maya." Olivia in the passenger seat was pressing her lips together with the effort of not laughing. He could see it in his peripheral vision. "You're not helping," he told her. "I'm not saying anything," she said, in a tone that communicated extensive internal commentary. Robert Carter was in his armchair when they arrived, with a blanket Diane had put over his legs that he was tolerating with visible but contained resignation. He was pale in the specific way of someone who'd had a difficult night and was in the early stages of the recovery from it, but his eyes were clear and his handshake, when Ethan came over, was the same as it always was. "You didn't have to come out," Robert said. "We wanted to," Ethan said. Robert looked at him for a second. The specific, quiet look that Ethan had come to understand was Robert Carter's version of saying a great deal. "Olivia told you what happened." "She was there. She came to me after." Robert nodded, looked at his daughter, who was across the room talking to her mother in the low, rapid way of women who have a lot of reassuring and reprocessing to do and are getting started on it. Then back at Ethan. "She came to you, Seats," he said. "Yeah." Something settled in Robert's face. "Good," he said simply. And then he reached over and squeezed Ethan's arm once, the way he had at the anniversary party all those months ago. The gesture that said the thing he wasn't going to say out loud. Ethan sat in the chair next to him and they talked, quietly, about nothing very significant. The cardiologist's assessment, the dietary changes Robert was already negotiating down in his head, the baseball season starting up, the way the backyard was looking now that spring had arrived. The kind of conversation men have when they've established enough between them that the content of the conversation is secondary to the fact of it. Sophie arrived an hour later, still in the clothes she'd driven down in the night before, with gas station coffee and the slightly dazed quality of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and was now on the other side of it. She hugged her father for a long time. She hugged her mother. She hugged Olivia. She saw Ethan across the room and pointed at him with the specific authority of someone with a documented history of being right about things. "I have a note," she said.
"I know about the note," he said. "It has your name in it multiple times. I'm honored."
"You should be." She sat down on the couch and accepted a cup of tea from her mother and looked around the room. At her father in his armchair with the blanket he was tolerating, at her mother moving between kitchen and living room with the restless energy of a woman who processed anxiety through activity, at Olivia near the window talking on her phone to Jess Huang about something work-related because Olivia was never entirely not working and her family had long since made their peace with that, at Ethan sitting in the chair next to Robert with the ease of a person who knew exactly where he was and had stopped being surprised by it. Sophie looked at all of this and felt the specific satisfaction of someone whose long-running assessment of a situation has been comprehensively vindicated. She also felt, underneath that, the quieter thing, the gratitude. For her father being okay, for the particular shape of the room right now, all the people in it, and what they were to each other. For the fact that things had found their way to the configuration they were always trying to reach. She drank her tea and didn't say any of that out loud, because some things didn't require saying. The evening moved the way Carter family evenings moved, with Diane somehow producing a full dinner despite the fact that she'd been at a hospital until 4 a.m., a feat that Ethan had learned to stop questioning and simply assist with. So he was in the kitchen from 5 o'clock onward, and Sophie came in to help after a while, and the two of them worked in the easy parallel of people who'd shared enough kitchen time to have established a rhythm.
"She told you she loves you," Sophie said at one point.
Not a question. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "She texted me this morning, before she came to you, actually." Sophie was chopping onions with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd decided tears were acceptable collateral damage. She said she'd been trying to figure out how to say it, and she thought this morning might be the day. He turned back to what he was doing. "She said it."
"I know, she texted me after 2.
A beat. "She said you said it first."
"I did."
Sophie was quiet for a moment.
"She needed you to," she said. "Not because she didn't feel it, because she needed to know it was safe to say it back. That's just how she works."
He thought about that. About the particular dynamic of two people who both had reasons to be careful, both had histories with the cost of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and how the saying of the true thing had required one of them to go first and make the space safe for the other. He'd done that without fully thinking about it, because it was true, and it was time and the moment was right. But Sophie had identified something real in it. "She's braver than she thinks she is," he said. "She's braver about everything except her personal life." Sophie finished the onions and set the knife down. "She's been protecting herself for a long time. She just forgets sometimes that the same wall that keeps things out also keeps you in." He nodded. "You're good for her," Sophie said. "I don't say that because you're here or because we're standing in my mother's kitchen on a hard day. I've thought it for years. You're good for her in the specific way that's actually hard to find. Not because you make things easier, but because you make things more honest." She paused. "That's rare. People don't know how rare that is." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "She's good for me. For the record." "I know that too." Sophie picked up a dish towel. "You were both good for each other for years before you were willing to be anything about it. It just took the two of you a while to catch up with what the rest of us could see." Sophie. I know. I'm not going to do the told you so thing extensively." She paused. "The note is already comprehensive. I don't need to elaborate." "Very restrained of you." "I have depth that people often overlook." Olivia appeared in this kitchen doorway, phone finally put away, looking less tight than she'd been all day. She took in the two of them at the counter, the state of dinner preparation, the particular quality of the silence she'd walked into. "Are you talking about me?"
she said. We were talking about the onions, Sophie said. You were talking about me. The onions are very relevant to the conversation, Ethan said. Olivia looked between them. I find both of you deeply suspicious. She came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter beside Ethan, in the specific way she had of orienting toward him in rooms, a thing she probably didn't consciously do and which he had never pointed out because pointing it out would make it self-conscious, and he preferred it the way it was, unthinking, habitual, real. Can I do something? You can set the table, Sophie said. I can do that. She pushed off the counter, then she paused. How's Dad? Honestly. Sophie and Ethan looked at each other briefly. He's okay, Sophie said. Today he's okay. And the cardiologist is good, and the monitoring is good, and we're going to have a conversation with him about actually following the dietary guidelines, which will be a whole thing, but she paused. He's okay. Today we can be glad he's okay. Olivia nodded. Yeah, she took a breath. Yeah, okay. She went to set the table. Through the kitchen doorway, they could hear Robert and Diane having a low conversation in the living room. Not the content, just the sound of it, the particular back-and-forth cadence of two people who had been in conversation with each other for 35 years and had developed a language that existed below the surface of words. Steady. Ongoing. Built from decades of the ordinary and the extraordinary in equal measure. Ethan listened to it and thought about what Robert had said weeks ago through Olivia's recollection. The mark of someone worth having around is whether they make things better or just different. He thought about that as a standard, not perfection, not the absence of difficulty or friction or the days when things were hard, just better. The net direction of better. He thought he was managing it, not always, not without effort, but the direction was right. Dinner was what Carter family dinners always were. Loud and warm and slightly too much of everything, with overlapping conversations and Diane's commentary on everyone's eating and Robert accepting a glass of wine over Diane's mild objection, and Sophie refereeing the wine negotiation with the diplomatic skill of her profession, which was managing 5-year-olds and had more transferable applications than people realized. Maya ate with the focused efficiency of a child who has identified hunger as her primary current problem and is solving it methodically. She had appointed herself Robert's dinner companion with the unilateral confidence that characterized all her decisions, and was explaining to him, in some detail, the current state of her understanding of Cretaceous period biodiversity. Robert listened with genuine attention, asking occasional questions that revealed he'd retained more from previous Maya briefings than anyone gave him credit for. He has infinite patience, Olivia said quietly to Ethan at one point, watching them. He does, Ethan agreed. I got some of that. Sophie got none of it. Sophie has her own gifts. Sophie has extremely strong opinions and the confidence to deploy them immediately, which is also a gift, depending on the context. Olivia considered this. Accurate, she said. After dinner, in the accumulated comfortable disorder of a meal finished among people who had nowhere to be, Maya fell asleep on the living room couch in the compressed way of children who go from fully operational to entirely unconscious, with no intermediate stages. Ethan put the blanket that had been on Robert's chair over her, and Robert, from the armchair, watched this happen with the quiet expression of a man who was looking at something and thinking about it. She's going to be something, Robert said. She already is, Ethan said. I know. A pause. So are you. I want to say that directly, since I generally don't. He looked at Ethan. You've been good for this family for a long time, and you're good for my daughter. And I don't say that lightly. Ethan held his gaze. Thank you, Robert. Don't thank me, just keep doing what you're doing. I intend to. Robert nodded, once, the way he settled things. Then he reached for his cup of tea, and the matter was apparently complete as far as he was concerned, which was very Robert, and which Ethan found more meaningful than a longer speech would have been. They left at 9, Maya transferred to the back seat of the car, still mostly asleep, Triceratops present and accounted for. Olivia was in the passenger seat, shoes off, feet not quite reaching the dash in a different car than her own. She was quiet for the first 10 minutes of the drive, looking out the window at the road, and Ethan let the quiet be what it was. Today was a lot, she said finally. Yeah. The good kind and the hard kind at the same time. That's usually how the important days work. She turned to look at him. In the dark of the car with the highway lights moving across her face, she looked tired and real and exactly like herself.
Can I ask you something? Yeah. What do you want? Not for me, not for Maya, not for any specific external thing. What do you actually want going forward? He thought about it honestly. This, he said, roughly this. The version of this that keeps changing shape as we figure it out. He paused. I want to stop waiting for things to be settled before I let myself have them. That's the specific thing. He glanced at her. I spent a long time thinking life was something that would become stable eventually, and then I could start really living in it. And I think that's wrong. I think the instability is the thing. The figuring out is the thing. She was quiet for a moment. I want to stop running everything past the risk filter first, she said. Not for work. For work it's appropriate. But for the rest of it. She looked at her hands. I want to be brave with the personal stuff the way I've always been brave with the professional stuff. I want those two versions of me to match. They're getting there. Are they? Yeah, he said. They are. I've been watching. She smiled, faint and true, at the window. They drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, the comfortable kind. Maya made a small sound from the back seat at one point that meant she was transitioning between sleep cycles and then went quiet again. The highway moved under them. The lights of Hoboken appeared ahead on the right side, the familiar geometry of the city they both lived in. The water tower on Park Avenue, the grid of brownstone rooftops. And Ethan took the exit without thinking about it. He pulled into the parking garage and cut the engine. Olivia didn't move immediately. She sat for a moment with her feet still not quite reaching the dashboard and her hands in her lap, and the particular quality of stillness she had when she'd arrived somewhere she wanted to stay. I'm going to stay tonight, she said. If that's okay. You don't have to ask. I know. A pause. I know I don't. He got out and opened the back door and lifted Maya. Dead weight, the particular sleeping child density that was somehow always more than her regular weight, and carried her toward the elevator. Olivia got the doors. She'd done this before, the logistics of it, and had the timing down without discussion. They got Maya upstairs and into bed with the practiced efficiency of people who'd become fluent in this specific task. Ethan tucked the blanket around her, and Maya turned sideways in the way she always did, and the Triceratops went in under her arm because it always went there. And then they stood in the doorway for a second looking at her in the dark. She sleeps like she lives, Olivia said quietly, completely committed. Yeah, he said. She does. They stood there together in the doorway, the two of them, with the sounds of the apartment around them and the city below, and this small sleeping person between them who was the most real and irreducible fact in Ethan's life. And Olivia's hand found his in the dark, without either of them directing it, and they stood there like that, not saying anything, not needing to, until it was time to close the door gently and move back into the light. Later, much later, when Maya was deep asleep and the apartment was quiet and they were in the kitchen making the kind of late-night food that doesn't need to be ambitious, toast, eggs, whatever was in the refrigerator, Olivia said, I've been thinking about what Sophie said. What did Sophie say? She said, Olivia cracked an egg into the pan. She said that the same wall that keeps things out also keeps you in. She watched the egg for a second. She was talking about me, but I've been thinking about how it applies more broadly. She looked up. I think the thing I was protecting for 8 years, the friendship, the safety of it, the known quantity of what we had, I think it became its own kind of cage. Not a bad one, but still. I said that, he noted, on the back steps, in October. You did. I wasn't entirely ready to hear it then. She flipped the egg. I'm saying it now because I've caught up. He thought about that. The cage that was also a home. The safe place that was also a container. How both things could be true simultaneously, and how you could love something even as you recognized it was limiting you, and how the work of a life was sometimes just the slow process of recognizing the difference between the things keeping you safe and the things keeping you small. I don't think we wasted 8 years, he said. I know I said something like that once, but I don't think it's right. She looked at him. I think we spent 8 years becoming the people who could actually do this, he said. I don't think I was ready at 24 to be what I need to be now. I don't think we would have built what we've built if we'd tried to start it then. He paused. The timing was the timing. It was what it was. She considered this seriously, the way she considered things she wanted to give real thought to. I think you're partly right, she said, and I think you're also slightly letting both of us off the hook. Maybe. Both things can be true. Both things can be true, she agreed. She turned the egg onto the plate. I still think I was scared longer than I needed to be. Probably. I was too. So we were both scared, and we both lost time, and we're both here now. That's about right. She put the plate on the counter and looked at him. Okay, she said. I can work with that. Good. She picked up the plate and came around the counter and sat on the stool beside him, and they ate toast and eggs at 11:30 at night in his kitchen with his daughter asleep down the hall and the city doing its quiet thing outside, and it was completely, ordinarily, stubbornly real. There was no clean resolution to offer about the way things end up. No moment where everything locked into place and the uncertainty dissolved. Life was not built that way, and the people in it were not built that way either. Not Ethan, who was still working on processing out loud instead of presenting conclusions. Not Olivia, who was still learning to step away from the risk filter for the things that deserved to be felt before they were analyzed. They were both carrying their habits and their histories, both still occasionally their own worst obstacles, both fundamentally imperfect in the specific ways that people are when they're real. But here was what was true. They had stopped pretending. That was the actual work, not the feelings, which had existed for years and had never needed any help. The pretending was the thing that had cost them time, the elaborate architecture of almost saying it, almost reaching for it, almost letting themselves have the thing they'd already built without calling it what it was. They'd torn down the almost. What was left was simpler and heavier and considerably more themselves. Ethan looked at the woman beside him, eating toast at 11:30, her hair in the second iteration of its dissolution, the particular quality of her stillness that only existed in a small number of places with a small number of people, and he was in that number, had always been in that number, and would remain in it. He was as certain of that as he was of anything. The friendship hadn't been lost. It was still there. Every part of it, the shorthand and the history, and the specific fluency they'd developed over 8 years of paying attention to each other. It was still there and always would be, because that was what it meant to have known someone long enough to have them built into you. It was just no longer the only thing. They had found, inside of it, the thing that had been growing there quietly for years, patient and stubborn, and waiting for two people to get brave enough to look at it directly. It was not perfect. Nothing real ever is. It was theirs. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.